Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. Around 6 a.m. on June 2nd, 2020, outside an apartment on the 16th floor of a residential complex in Nanchang, an 8-year-old girl, Ling Ling, stepped into the hallway in a state of panic. Her entire body was trembling, her tiny hands clenched tightly with fear. Timidly, she reached out and knocked on the neighbor's door, soft, hesitant knocks breaking the eerie silence. Within 5 minutes, the door slowly creaked open. Mrs. Wang, an elderly neighbor, stood frozen, her eyes widening in horror at the sight before her. Ling Ling stood there, wearing a thin nightgown, her small body stained with crimson marks. Her innocent eyes were filled with fear, and her lips trembled uncontrollably. In a weak, broken voice, she whispered, "Grandma, my mom, he hurt her." Immediately, Mrs. Wang called her daughter, and both of them rushed to Gu Qifan's apartment. As the door opened, they froze in horror. The entire place was soaked in a deep red hue, and the overpowering metallic scent filled the air, making them dizzy and nearly collapse. Mrs. Wang immediately called the police. Within about 15 minutes, law enforcement arrived at the scene. After an initial examination, police quickly confirmed the victim's identity as Gu Qifan, 33 years old, a single mother who lived with her 8-year-old daughter, Ling Ling. It was revealed that after her divorce, Gu Qifan rented a small apartment and opened a nail salon in a local shopping mall to support herself. Upon hearing that her daughter had been brutally murdered, Mrs. Gu rushed to the crime scene. Overcome with grief, she collapsed, her entire body shaking as she sobbed in agony. "My poor daughter, why did she have to die so tragically? Her body was mutilated, even her ears are gone." Not far away, little Ling Ling sat curled up in a corner, her gaze empty, detached from reality. It wasn't until the afternoon, after being comforted by the police and relatives, that Ling Ling slowly calmed down. In a faint voice, she recounted the horrifying moment. "It was him. He broke down the bedroom door. Mom and I were sleeping, but who was this him that Ling Ling referred to? Why did he ruthlessly take the life of a single mother right before an innocent child's eyes?" The police immediately expanded their investigation, focusing on those close to the victim, especially individuals who had conflicts or potential motives for the crime. According to some neighbors, Gu Qifan was a kind and pleasant person, but she was very private about her personal life and few knew details about her relationships. No one could have imagined that this horrifying tragedy stemmed from a mistake in choosing the wrong person. Let's go back in time to 2018, when Gu Qifan was a woman who had just stepped out of a failed marriage. With the desire to provide the best life for her child, Gu Qifan decided to open a small nail salon in the Huangfujing shopping center. Although the shop was not large, thanks to its prime location in a bustling area, the business thrived, helping her gradually stabilize her life. On days when she didn't have school, Ling Ling often accompanied her mother to the shop. To ensure her daughter could study while staying close to her, Gu Qifan prepared a small table for Ling Ling, where she could read books and do her homework while her mother worked. Gu Qifan always tried to give Ling Ling a complete childhood, dedicating all her love and care to her. She thought that peaceful life would last forever, but her fate changed at the end of 2018, when she accidentally met a man at a gathering with friends. That man's name was Qiu Jiang. Even as a single mother, Gu Qifan maintained her youthful and radiant beauty. She had a trendy fashion sense and took great care of herself, making it hard for others to guess her real age. At the 2018 gathering, Qiu Jiang was immediately captivated by her beauty. Not missing the opportunity, he actively approached her, started a conversation, and asked for her phone number, marking the beginning of an intense pursuit. Every day, Qiu Jiang appeared in front of her nail salon with a large bouquet of roses, patiently waiting for Gu Qifan to finish work. After work, Qiu Jiang attentively picked her up, regardless of whether it was sunny or raining. He often took Gu Qifan out for dinner at luxurious restaurants with romantic atmospheres. When she got home, Qiu Jiang immediately sent sweet messages, using affectionate words to make her feel like the most important person in the world. Perhaps because she had been alone for so long, Gu Qifan started to be moved by his attentiveness. Gradually, she fell in love with Qiu Jiang, even though deep down, she soon noticed some warning signs. Qiu Jiang had no stable job, relied on gambling, was always short on money, and frequently borrowed from others. Gu Qifan still convinced herself to continue the relationship, hoping that love could change a person. However, just a month later, a friend of Gu Qifan accidentally revealed a shocking truth. Qiu Jiang was already married, and even had 2 children. Stunned, Gu Qifan suddenly realized that she had unknowingly become the other woman, that all the promises of love she had believed in were just lies. She immediately cut off all ties, and wanted nothing more to do with Qiu Jiang. But Qiu Jiang refused to accept it. He became obsessed, willing to do anything to keep her. He knelt down, begging desperately for forgiveness. He cried continuously, swearing he would divorce if only she gave him a chance. Gu Qifan was a gentle and kind-hearted woman. Just seeing a stray cat on the street made her feel pity. And this was the man she had once loved deeply. She had once dreamed of a happy family, believing that sincerity could change a person. And in the end, she chose to believe him once again. After a year of secrecy in July 2019, Qiu Jiang officially divorced. He declared that love had conquered all, and that finally, the 2 of them could be together openly. Gu Qifan naively believed that this was a new beginning, but she had no idea that this was only the start of a nightmare with no way out. From the very beginning, Gu Qifan's parents never supported this relationship. They saw through Qiu Jiang's nature, an unstable man without ambition, always vague about his future. Gu Qifan's parents anxiously warned her, "A 30-year-old man who still doesn't have a stable job. Do you think he will take care of you and your daughter in the future?" But Gu Qifan ignored everything and firmly responded, "As long as he loves me and loves my daughter, that's enough." She even told herself, "He divorced for me. Isn't that proof of his sincere love?" But it didn't take long for Gu Qifan to realize that Qiu Jiang was indeed as unreliable as his parents had warned. Right after the divorce, Qiu Jiang revealed his true nature. He didn't look for a job, and spent his days hanging out with friends, indulging in a reckless lifestyle. Qiu Jiang completely relied on Gu Qifan's money, enjoying it without any intention of becoming independent. He sank deeper into gambling, repeatedly borrowing money from Gu Qifan with promises to repay, but never fulfilling them. Gu Qifan paid off Qiu Jiang's credit card debts multiple times, hoping to help him get his life back on track. At the same time, she tried to persuade him to find a job, not for the salary, but because she believed a man couldn't remain lazy and irresponsible forever. But despite his promises, Qiu Jiang never changed. He kept losing himself in poker games, ignoring all of Gu Qifan's advice. It wasn't until a shocking incident that Gu Qifan finally decided to break up with Qiu Jiang. That day, Qiu Jiang once again asked Gu Qifan for money to gamble. She refused, unwilling to enable his addiction. But Gu Qifan never expected Qiu Jiang to resort to violence. While she was distracted, he suddenly shoved her against the wall and forcefully snatched her wallet. Without hesitation, he searched through it and took all the money inside. That act completely shattered Gu Qifan's trust in Qiu Jiang. She lost all hope in him and decided to cut ties. But how could Qiu Jiang easily let go of the money source he had grown dependent on? No matter where Gu Qifan went, Qiu Jiang followed, constantly harassing her with obsessive stalking. Not only did she suffer, but even her colleagues, friends, and neighbors were also disturbed by him. Qiu Jiang became more and more terrifying. He knocked on Gu Qifan's door at midnight, tampered with the hallway lights, and broke into her shop to beg for money. He even followed her parents and daughter, secretly taking photos of them and sending them to Gu Qifan as a threat. These obsessive actions pushed Gu Qifan into a state of nervous breakdown. Desperate, she had no choice but to call the police for help. However, as soon as the police arrived, Qiu Jiang immediately pretended to be a decent man, acting obedient and remorseful. Since there was no concrete evidence of criminal behavior, the police could only warn and advise him to stop. As soon as the police left, Qiu Jiang resumed harassing Gu Qifan. Once, he shamelessly asked to borrow 20,000 yuan from her for gambling. Fed up with Qiu Jiang's constant stalking and harassment, Gu Qifan had no choice but to pay to avoid trouble. Hoping he would finally leave her alone, she transferred 20,000 yuan to Qiu Jiang. He pretended to write an IOU, but she knew well that this money would never return. However, Gu Qifan's patience didn't stop Qiu Jiang. On the contrary, he became even more aggressive, like a shadow haunting her life. 2 days before the incident, from her apartment window, Gu Qifan saw Qiu Jiang wandering below the building, as if stalking her. Shortly after, a knock echoed from outside the security door. Gu Qifan panicked, fearing that Qiu Jiang might break in. With no other option, she quickly called the police for help. When the police arrived, they immediately arrested Chiu Jiang, who was carrying a dagger. However, just as they were about to take him to the station, Gu Qifan hesitated. Wanting to calm the situation, she proposed a settlement, only asking Chiu Jiang to promise he would stop harassing her. Seeing that Chiu Jiang admitted his mistakes with a good attitude and hadn't physically harmed anyone, the police decided to treat the case as a domestic dispute. They only gave him a verbal warning, educated him about his wrongful actions, and let him go. No one expected that just 2 days later, a tragedy would occur. Chiu Jiang felt abandoned by Gu Qifan, bitterly believing she didn't appreciate him. He had divorced for her, left his wife and child, drowned in debt from gambling, and was unable to repay his loans. In the end, he had nothing left. He blamed everything on Gu Qifan, believing she was the one who ruined his life. And so he decided to make her pay with her life. At 7 p.m. in 2020, Chiu Jiang silently took a dagger and a kitchen knife, carefully hiding them under his clothes. Under the cover of darkness, Chiu Jiang sneaked into the apartment complex where Gu Qifan lived, his heart filled with hatred and murderous intent. Then, Chiu Jiang silently hid on the rooftop of the building, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Around 8 p.m., from the rooftop, he looked down and saw Gu Qifan and her daughter just entering the apartment complex. At that moment, Gu Qifan had no idea that a pair of eyes were silently watching her from above. As usual, she locked the security door and then carefully locked the inner door once more. According to Gu Qifan's daughter's later testimony, around 9 p.m., as they were preparing for bed, they suddenly heard the sound of a lighter and footsteps. The little girl anxiously asked her mother, "Mom, is he inside?" Immediately, they checked all the rooms but found nothing unusual. After that, Gu Qifan tightly shut the windows, locked the bedroom door, and even used a chair to barricade it for safety. At 5 a.m., Chiu Jiang used a spare key he had prepared in advance to sneak into the house. But when he tried to open the bedroom door, he realized it was locked from the inside. Enraged, Chiu Jiang kicked the door violently, breaking it open. The loud noise startled Gu Qifan and her daughter awake at the same time. Seeing Chiu Jiang burst into the room, Ling Ling trembled and clutched her mother's hand, whispering, "Mom, he's inside." Gu Qifan was shocked by Chiu Jiang's actions and shouted angrily, "What are you doing? Get out!" But before she could finish speaking, Chiu Jiang grabbed the kitchen knife and furiously lunged at her. He then pulled out a dagger and continued his frenzied attack, unleashing his madness on Gu Qifan's body. Ling Ling was paralyzed with fear, unable to move. But summoning all her courage, she trembled and screamed, "Don't hurt my mom." Chiu Jiang glared at the girl and coldly shouted, "Shut up." Fear gripped Ling Ling's throat, leaving her unable to utter another word. More than 10 minutes of horror passed before Chiu Jiang finally stopped. He took Gu Qifan's phone and calmly left the scene. By then, Gu Qifan had collapsed in a pool of red, silent forever. After a few minutes, Ling Ling finally dared to get out of bed, cautiously approaching her mother. She called her several times, but there was no response. The scene before her sent Ling Ling into panic, but she struggled to stay calm. Seeing her mother injured, she ran to the kitchen, grabbed a basin of cold water, and poured it over her mother's face, hoping she would wake up. But Gu Qifan did not move. The girl wanted to call the police, but her mother's phone had been taken by Jiang. With no other choice, Ling Ling gathered her courage, walked to the door, and peeked outside to make sure no one was in the hallway. Then, she cautiously knocked on the neighbor's door, where Mrs. Wang lived, begging for help. According to the forensic report, Gu Qifan's body had 56 deep wounds scattered across her head, shoulders, back, arms, and legs. The tragedy was so devastating that Gu Qifan's family hoped the funeral home could stitch her body before cremation. But the response they received was, "The wounds are too severe. It cannot be stitched together." At 1 p.m. on June 3, 2020, the police arrested Gu Jiang while he was hiding in Yueqi County, 70 kilometers from the crime scene. Faced with undeniable evidence, Gu Jiang finally confessed to his crime. Gu Jiang's family remained completely silent. No one stepped forward to take responsibility or apologize to Gu Qifan's family. It was not until the day before the trial that Gu Jiang's younger sister met with Gu Qifan's parents, offering 60,000 yuan in hopes that the Gu family would agree to a settlement and forgive his crime. Outraged by the Gu family's indifference and irresponsibility, Mrs. Gu angrily cried out, "Can 60,000 yuan buy my daughter's life?" In the end, Gu Jiang's sister was thrown out of the house by Mr. and Mrs. Gu. On December 30, 2020, the Nanchang Intermediate People's Court announced its first instance ruling. Gu Jiang was convicted of intentional homicide and public disorder. His death sentence was suspended for 2 years, and he was ordered to pay over 760,000 yuan in compensation to the victim's family. This verdict sparked public outrage, but no one was more devastated and angered than the Gu family. Although Gu Jiang was sentenced to death, the 2-year suspension was unacceptable to them, because if Gu Jiang committed no further intentional crimes during the 2-year suspension, his sentence would be reduced to life imprisonment. Moreover, if he demonstrated good behavior, his sentence could be further reduced to 25 years in prison. As a result, the Gu family immediately submitted a petition to the Nanchang People's Procuratorate demanding a harsher sentence for Gu Jiang. After reviewing the relevant factors, on January 13, 2021, the Nanchang People's Procuratorate officially filed an appeal with the Sichuan High People's Court, requesting a reconsideration of the first instance ruling. On December 28, 2021, the Sichuan Supreme Court issued its final verdict. Gu Jiang was guilty of intentional homicide and was sentenced to immediate execution. Gu Qifan's death plunged her family into endless grief and despair. Her elderly parents in particular were unable to bear the pain of losing their daughter. As for Lingling, she was only 8 years old, but had to witness her mother's brutal murder with her own eyes. That horrific moment left a deep scar on her young heart, a permanent wound that could never heal. Since the tragedy, Lingling has been unable to sleep without the lights on. She frequently has nightmares and panics at loud noises. She became withdrawn and quiet. Her academic performance declined drastically, and she even showed signs of depression. Case 2. New York, September 2024. A shocking announcement was broadcast from the Queens District Attorney's Office. Haiyan Deng, 33 years old, a Chinese woman, officially pleaded guilty to murdering her lover in a case that occurred 3 years ago. Many details had been left unanswered for a long time, but now, as the truth is revealed, the public is left in shock. A secret affair, a scheme for financial gain, and a crime hidden for years. Haiyan Deng not only committed murder, but also used her unborn child to manipulate her lover, attempting to force him to divorce and pay a huge sum of money. When she failed, she ruthlessly killed him. What drove this woman to such extremes? How did she manage to evade capture for 3 years? Like and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the full details of this shocking case. 5 p.m. September 23, 2024, State of New Mexico. A regular afternoon on Interstate 40, near the town of Edgewood. Patrol Officer Rebecca Lane was on her usual shift when she spotted a silver SUV parked by the roadside. Inside was an Asian woman with a worried expression. As Rebecca approached, the woman, speaking limited English, explained that her tire was flat and she was waiting for a friend to help. Rebecca offered assistance, but the woman quickly refused, insisting she would be fine. Not wanting to pressure her, Rebecca returned to her patrol car, assuming it was a minor issue. However, hours later, during her night patrol, Rebecca was stunned to see the same SUV still there. The woman remained by the roadside, now looking even more anxious. Something was wrong. This time, Rebecca decided to stop and approach. She gently asked, "You're still here? Is your friend reliable? Is he bringing the tire?" The woman looked confused, slowly pulled out her phone, pointed at a location on the screen, and asked, "Can you take me here?" Rebecca immediately hesitated. The destination was near the U.S.-Mexico border, an area notorious for smuggling, human trafficking, and organized crime. This was too risky. Unsure whether the woman was truly in trouble or hiding something, Rebecca's instincts as a cop made her cautious. She decided to check the SUV before doing anything else. If needed, she would take the woman to a safe location in town and call for roadside assistance. Following protocol, Rebecca reported the vehicle's license plate to dispatch. She had no idea that within seconds, a shocking truth would emerge. On the other end, the dispatcher's voice came through. This Pennsylvania license plate matches a vehicle on the National Wanted list. The suspect is linked to a homicide in New York, identified as Haiyan Deng. Rebecca's eyes locked to the woman standing before her. Was she just a stranded traveler? Or a cold-blooded murderer on the run? Worse yet, Rebecca's radio was on speaker mode. The woman had undoubtedly heard everything. Despite her limited English, she recognized the words, New York. No further explanation was needed. The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes darted nervously, revealing her rising tension. Officer Rebecca Lane remained calm, pretending to continue assisting with the flat tire. She adjusted her tone to avoid alarming the woman, while subtly trying to stall for time by engaging in casual conversation. Moments later, sensing danger, the woman began showing signs of nervousness. She clutched her coat collar, shivered slightly, and stammered, "It's so cold, I need to get another jacket from my car." Rebecca didn't take her eyes off her. A fall night in New Mexico wasn't cold enough for that. She immediately understood. The woman was either trying to escape or retrieve something from the car. "Stay right there. I'll get your jacket for you." Rebecca stepped forward, blocking the car door. Her voice remained calm, but her sharp gaze delivered an unspoken warning. The woman froze. Then suddenly, her demeanor shifted completely. From shivering with cold, she became agitated, her face flushing with anger. She yelled in broken English, "Why won't you let me in my car? I did nothing wrong." Her voice was sharp, her hands flailing wildly. Rebecca stood her ground, not moving an inch. "Calm down, I just want to make sure you're safe." But the woman refused to listen. In a panic, she lunged at Rebecca, trying to reach the car door. She yanked at the handle, but it was locked. At this point, there was no doubt she was attempting to flee. Rebecca immediately grabbed her radio. "I need backup. Suspect is trying to escape." The woman became even more aggressive, forcing Rebecca to pull out her handcuffs, deciding to arrest the suspect on the spot. But the woman didn't go down easily. As Rebecca grabbed her arm, she broke free, shoving Rebecca, and fought back fiercely. A struggle broke out right on the highway. Cars continued speeding by, engines roaring, drowning out the woman's screams. "Stay down," Rebecca shouted, trying to restrain the suspect, but she continued to fight back wildly. While Rebecca struggled to restrain the suspect, a passerby witnessed the scuffle and quickly pulled over. A middle-aged man stepped out of his pickup truck and rushed in to assist the officer. 2 against 1. Finally, with the stranger's help, Rebecca managed to subdue the suspect. Immediately after, her eyes turned toward the silver SUV. A nationally wanted fugitive stood before her. So what could be inside the car? Inside, there was a strange, pungent smell, a mix of sweat, cheap perfume, and something that resembled gunpowder. Sure enough, on the passenger seat lay a loaded handgun. Additionally, the police found a box of cash, fake documents, and a shattered phone. Within hours, footage of the arrest spread rapidly across social media. High-end social media accounts were dug up, revealing images of her flaunting a lavish lifestyle, extravagant parties, luxurious vacations, and designer goods. The glamorous Instagram persona starkly contrasted with her disheveled appearance at the time of her arrest. The heavily edited photos made many wonder, if not for the license plate, would the police have even recognized her? She had traveled thousands of miles, nearing the Mexican border, where U.S. security checks were notoriously lax. If she had abandoned the car and crossed on foot, she could have completely disappeared. But instead of acting like a professional fugitive, Hyen chose to stand by the roadside, in the dead of night, waiting for someone. So what exactly was she running from, and what sentence did she face? Let's take a deeper look into her story. Born on January 30th, 1990, in a poor village in Guangdong, China, Hyen Den grew up dreaming of escaping poverty, like many young people in the region. Moving abroad, earning money, and sending it home to build a house, that was the path many villagers chose, regardless of whether the means were legal or not. In late 2015, Hyen entered the U.S. on a B2 tourist visa. But everyone knew she wasn't there for sightseeing. Her first destination after landing wasn't a hotel or a relative's house, but Flushing, New York, the heart of the Chinese immigrant community. There, Hyen began her career in the flower-selling industry. With her attractive face and slim figure, she quickly caught the attention of high-end nightclubs. Initially, she was just a hostess, but thanks to her charm and ambition, Hyen climbed the ranks to become a manager, a madam. Her job now wasn't just entertaining clients, but managing a team of hostesses, arranging VIP customers, and taking a cut of the profits. Money flowed in, and her lifestyle became increasingly extravagant. But there was one big problem: her tourist visa had expired. Choosing to stay illegally, Hyen entered a world full of risks and violence, where without a solid footing, she could be swept away at any moment. Women like Hyen didn't just have to evade law enforcement, but also had to contend with criminal gangs within the Chinese community. In Flushing, there was an unspoken rule: either be strong or be prey. It was a dangerous game, but Hyen adapted. She became a crucial link in Flushing's underground business network, knowing how to gain favor with powerful figures while being ready to betray them when necessary. Despite living in the US for over 5 years, Haiyan Dan never learned to speak English. Whether it was a lack of ability or sheer laziness, her poor language skills were evident in her clumsy, broken sentences during her arrest. Her entire world revolved around Flushing, where she could easily navigate life in Chinese, work, and socialize without integrating into American culture. But on social media, Haiyan crafted a completely different image. On TikTok, she appeared as a wealthy, stylish socialite, posting numerous videos flaunting cash and designer goods. She even uploaded videos of herself practicing shooting at a gun range. Ironically, what seemed like mere showmanship would later become a crucial element in her murder case. Just as everything seemed to be going her way, the COVID-19 pandemic struck, delivering a severe blow to the nightlife industry and causing Haiyan's income to plummet. But financial struggles weren't her biggest fear. Her greatest concern was her illegal status in the U.S. The U.S. government was tightening immigration policies. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, crackdowns became more frequent, particularly targeting illicit brothels. To solve this problem, most women in Haiyan's situation chose the same solution: marrying a U.S. citizen. According to a former roommate, in just 2 years, Haiyan had cycled through at least 10 boyfriends. Most were former clients. But these relationships never lasted. In the nightlife scene, men liked to rescue good girls and encourage bad girls to reform. But none wanted a long-term commitment. They might enjoy the thrill, but the moment they sensed a risk of responsibility, they would disappear. Haiyan was no exception. She repeatedly failed to secure a stable relationship until she met Justin Lee, a man 5 years younger than her. Looking back, Justin Lee's parents were also immigrants from Fujian. They worked hard in Flushing, living frugally, so they could eventually open a large Chinese restaurant in East New York. Thanks to their cooking skills and sharp business sense, they gradually escaped poverty, eventually obtaining green cards and bringing their son to the U.S. from China. But Justin Lee was nothing like his parents. He was pampered from a young age, growing up in luxury. To make up for their years of separation, his parents spared no expense on their son. They bought him designer clothes, enrolled him in expensive private schools, and allowed him to live the life of a spoiled rich kid. Unlike most men who frequented nightclubs in search of young women, Justin was more interested in older, more experienced women. That was precisely why he was drawn to Haiyan Deng. And from this moment, Haiyan saw her chance for a better life. With a wealthy, generous man who was infatuated with her, Haiyan saw Justin Lee as an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss. She dedicated all her efforts to winning Justin over, making him feel special and unable to leave her. But the happy times didn't last long. Haiyan discovered a truth that posed a major obstacle to her plans. Despite being young, Justin Lee was already married with 2 children. His wife was a 22-year-old woman, and they had been married for 4 years. Determined not to lose her grip, Haiyan continued to pull Justin closer. She gave him her full attention, doing everything possible to maintain their relationship. She even started publicly posting intimate moments with Justin on social media. Haiyan's posts painted the picture of a devoted couple, despite the fact that Justin had never made any long-term promises to her. But no matter how hard Haiyan tried, Justin had no intention of leaving his wife and children. Meanwhile, Haiyan realized she had invested too much time, money, and emotion into Justin without getting the outcome she desired. The situation escalated when Haiyan discovered she was pregnant. She then demanded that Justin divorce his wife and marry her. Instead of panicking or making a quick decision, Justin remained cold and non-committal, delaying any response. Haiyan's frustration grew. She knew she couldn't continue working in nightclubs with her pregnancy becoming more obvious. So she started increasing the pressure on Justin, frequently faking stomach pains to keep him by her side. But Justin Lee's wife wasn't fooled. His Mexican wife hired a private investigator to track her husband's activities and quickly discovered Haiyan's apartment. Without hesitation, the wife decided to take action. She showed up at Haiyan's apartment unannounced. The moment she saw her husband's mistress, she lunged at her. Haiyan, not one to back down, fought back fiercely. A violent altercation erupted between the 2 women, one the legal wife and the other the pregnant mistress. Justin Lee was completely helpless, unable to intervene. Haiyan's terrified roommate, witnessing the chaos, immediately called the police. The police arrived quickly, breaking up the fight and arresting all 3 involved. However, since Haiyan couldn't afford bail, she was held in custody for a few days. Due to her illegal residency status, she was required to report to immigration authorities regularly and was prohibited from going near Justin Lee's wife. Without a stable income, Hyeon was forced to return to working in nightclubs, but this time, she had to constantly change locations to avoid detection. Her life became filled with anxiety and instability, far from the luxurious lifestyle she once had. As her pregnancy advanced, so did her financial needs. She realized that Justin Lee would never divorce his wife to marry her. So, instead of clinging to a hopeless love, Hyeon bluntly demanded $500,000 from Justin Lee. She called it compensation for emotional distress and wasted time spent with him. She promised that, if he paid the money, she would take care of the pregnancy and disappear from his life forever. However, Justin Lee, who had been spoiled all his life, had never been forced to make such a significant decision on the spot. He didn't want to lose money, but he also wasn't brave enough to cut ties with Hyeon completely. They continued negotiating, but the bargaining dragged on without resolution. Tensions escalated, and every meeting turned into a heated argument. Then, suddenly, on September 19, 2021, Justin Lee vanished without a trace. The police in Queens, New York, received a missing person report. The one who filed it was Justin Lee's wife. But unlike most missing person cases, she had a strong suspicion of where her husband might be. A few days before his disappearance, Justin and his wife had a heated argument at home. She had discovered that he was still secretly seeing Hyeon. Enraged, Justin Lee stormed out of the house without saying a word. He also turned off his phone, cutting off all contact. His wife suspected that he had gone to Hyeon for comfort. This wasn't the first time, but this time, 3 days had passed with no news, which was unusual. Even Justin's parents were unable to reach him. Sensing something was wrong, his wife finally decided to report him missing to the police. Understanding the situation, the police dispatched 2 officers to Hyeon's apartment to investigate. As soon as they stepped into the hallway, a faint, strange odor lingered in the air. Hyeon's roommate informed them that she hadn't seen Hyeon for 2 days. The door to Hyeon's bedroom was locked from the inside. The officers knocked multiple times, but there was no response. Left with no other choice, they decided to break down the door. The scene inside left them stunned. On the bed, a human-shaped object was tightly wrapped in a bed sheet. Blood stains had dried on the mattress, indicating that the incident had happened hours earlier. The overwhelming stench was suffocating. There was no doubt. Forensic experts were immediately called to the scene. When the sheet was removed, the body of a male victim was revealed. His body was covered in bruises, showing signs of an attack. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Based on the level of decomposition and rigor mortis, forensic experts estimated the time of death to be between 24 and 48 hours earlier. All valuables had been taken from the victim. The police reviewed the building's parking lot security cameras. Footage showed that 3 nights earlier, Justin Lee had driven a white Audi to Hyeon's apartment. After that, he was never seen leaving the apartment. The following morning, the camera captured a woman wearing a face mask leaving the apartment. She drove the white Audi away and never returned. Her body shape and facial features were unmistakable. It was Hyeon Deng. But now, Hyeon was also missing. The police immediately issued a nationwide arrest warrant. All evidence pointed to the fact that Hyeon had failed to reach a financial agreement with Justin Lee. In a fit of rage, she killed him, stole his belongings, and fled. The police visited the nightclub where Hyeon worked to gather information from her colleagues. Some witnesses reported that days before the incident, Hyeon had asked about purchasing a gun. She claimed that there had been a rise in robberies targeting female hostesses, and that she wanted a firearm for self-defense. Without proper documentation, Hyeon had to pay 3 times the market price to buy a handgun on the black market. The caliber and firing range of the gun matched the weapon used in Justin Lee's murder. Another critical detail emerged. Hyeon had told her colleagues that even if Justin agreed to give her money, she would not stay in the U.S. Her plan was to head north to Canada and start a new life. The police immediately alerted all U.S.-Canada border checkpoints and intensified their search. But days passed, and there was still no trace of Hyeon. That's when the police realized a crucial detail. Without U.S. citizenship, a green card, or legal documents, crossing into Canada was nearly impossible. It would be like walking straight into the hands of the authorities. They began to suspect that the Canada escape plan was a deliberate distraction. The real destination was likely the southern border, toward Mexico, where security was much more lenient. But if that were the case, why didn't she flee back to China? Haiyan's roommate revealed a shocking secret. Years ago, following the advice of a shady broker, Haiyan had destroyed her Chinese passport to apply for asylum. As a result, her asylum request was denied, and she lost her only form of identification. Without a passport, she couldn't board a flight back to China. At that moment, the police received a report from Pennsylvania linked to the case. It turned out that the white Audi Haiyan used to escape didn't belong to Justin Lee. In fact, it was registered to a friend of his named Mr. Wong. Due to his extravagant spending habits, Justin's parents had confiscated his car over the years. As a result, Justin had to borrow vehicles from friends to maintain his image. When Mr. Wong learned about Justin's disappearance, he checked the car's location using the GPS tracking system. He discovered that the vehicle was moving south along the interstate highway. Mr. Wong then remotely disabled the car, preventing it from starting. The vehicle was later abandoned in a parking lot in Houston, Texas. When the police arrived to inspect the car, they found a small amount of blood inside. Tests confirmed that it was Justin Lee's blood. Surveillance footage showed that when Haiyan realized the car had been locked, she appeared extremely distressed. She made multiple phone calls. A short while later, a middle-aged man arrived. He requested to remain anonymous, but later admitted to the police that he was a regular client of Haiyan. In a state of panic, Haiyan offered him a large sum of money to rent a car for her. The man believed Haiyan was fleeing from a gang. Driven by greed, he agreed to help. He rented a silver Honda CR-V and handed it over to Haiyan. The moment she received the car, she sped off, heading straight toward the Mexican border. After traveling 3,000 kilometers, when the vehicle suffered a flat tire, Haiyan's escape came to an end. The New Mexico police had just carried out one of the most dramatic arrests of the year. 2 months later, she was extradited back to New York to attend her first court hearing. In court, Haiyan remained completely silent, only denying the charges. But one detail shocked the public. Haiyan's pregnancy was visibly evident. A later report confirmed that she had given birth in April 2022. But who was the child's father? That remains an unsolved mystery. On September 18, 2024, the Queens District Attorney officially announced that Haiyan Deng had pleaded guilty. Melinda C., the Queens District Attorney, stated, "A life was senselessly taken, and the defendant now faces a long prison sentence for her actions." The court sentenced Haiyan Deng to 27 years in prison, bringing an end to the fugitive's 3-year run. Case 3. On May 21, 2021, South Korean Air Force Sergeant Lee Urim unexpectedly committed suicide in her military dormitory. But this was no ordinary suicide. Just before leaving this world, Lee Urim left behind a video exposing everything she had endured during her service. Even more tragic was the fact that the day she chose to end everything was also the day of her wedding to her longtime boyfriend. When this information was made public, it caused a massive outcry in South Korea, leading to nearly 400,000 people signing a petition demanding a thorough investigation. That evening, they celebrated with a dinner at an upscale restaurant. After dinner, her husband had to work a night shift. Lee Urim drove him to his workplace. She was still smiling, still acting as normal as any other day. Past 11 p.m., Lee Urim opened the fridge and took out the meal she had prepared for her husband the next morning. She placed the meal on the table and adjusted the lid. Then she picked up her phone and sent her husband a familiar message. "Good night. See you tomorrow." But this time, there was no "see you tomorrow." Right after sending the message, she set her phone down, turned on the camera, and recorded the final moments of her life. "I tried to fight. I followed the procedures, but no one stood by my side. I was betrayed, forced into silence. I can't bear it anymore." The next morning at 6:30 a.m., her husband finished his shift and returned home. However, the moment he opened the door, a horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes. Lee Urim was lying motionless on the floor. She had taken her own life. Her body was ice cold. Her husband immediately called her family. He still couldn't believe the reality before him. The room was still neat, with no signs of struggle or disorder. It was as if Lee Urim had planned everything in advance. But the most haunting thing wasn't Lee Urim's body. It was the phone lying next to her. The screen was still lit, displaying an unwatched video. From here, the veil of secrecy, or rather, the reason behind this tragedy, began to unravel. Lee Urim had been sexually assaulted by her own comrades, and when she reported it, no one helped her. The perpetrators were not only unpunished, but had also conspired to defame her, making her feel like a troublemaker, someone who deserved to be scorned. She felt that her body had been tainted, and that she was no longer worthy of her fiancé. Death was the only way she could atone for what she believed was her fault. In the video, Lee Urim didn't just expose those who destroyed her life. She also spoke about herself, about the things that made her strong, but also made her a target for merciless suppression. Lee Urim was not an ordinary girl. From a young age, she possessed a natural beauty and aura that rivaled any celebrity. Talent scouts even approached her multiple times, inviting her to enter the entertainment industry. Her friends never understood why she refused. She could have become a famous star, a top actress, achieving fame and wealth effortlessly. But she rejected it. To Lee Urim, fame meant nothing. She had another dream. She wanted to be a soldier. And with perseverance and extraordinary effort, she achieved her dream, becoming a female officer in the South Korean Air Force. In 2017, Lee Urim officially joined the 20th Fighter Wing of the South Korean Air Force, one of the most prestigious and elite units in the country. Established in December 1996, the 20th Fighter Wing was not only a key unit in the Air Force, but also frequently participated in joint military exercises with the U.S., showcasing its strategic importance. Being selected into such an elite unit was a great honor for any soldier. For Lee Urim, this wasn't just an achievement, it was a significant step toward fulfilling her dream of becoming an exceptional military officer. She thought she was getting closer to her life's purpose. But she didn't realize that her nightmare was just beginning. Because she was a woman, in an environment dominated by male soldiers, she quickly became the center of attention. Her striking beauty, openness, and strong-willed personality, all of these made Lee Urim both admired and the target of inappropriate gazes. At first, it was just harmless flirting. But when she politely declined, those gazes changed. They were no longer friendly. Lee Urim did not want to be the subject of gossip, nor did she want to be entangled in false rumors. She chose to keep her distance. She spoke less, smiled less, and even brought her boyfriend to the base, hoping this would make the pursuers stop. And it worked. Most of those who had previously flirted with her automatically backed off. They kept their distance and stopped pursuing her. But not everyone was like that. Sergeant Jang, an older male colleague who had enlisted before her, one of the few who refused to accept rejection. Jang took advantage of the senior-junior relationship to get close to her. At first, it was just seemingly harmless jokes, small talk she didn't want to hear. But soon, it didn't stop at words. He began to invade her personal space. Accidental touches on her shoulder, lingering stares when she changed in the training room. Lee Urim felt suffocated. She tried to keep her distance, but Jang wouldn't stop. He found every excuse to approach her. At a company, Jang drank a lot. Even though many people were around, he openly made inappropriate advances toward Lee Urim. Unfortunately, no one stepped in to stop him. Lee Urim was forced to push back. "Don't ever touch me again," Urim shouted. All eyes turned toward her, but no one said anything. No one stood up for her. This act humiliated Jang. He felt his pride was shattered, and from that moment, he held a grudge against her. From that day on, Urim tried harder than ever to avoid Jang. She knew he was not the type to forgive easily. A few days later, her superior, Warrant Officer No, unexpectedly approached her. He was someone she rarely interacted with, which made her cautious. "I want you to accompany me to a party," he said, leaving no room for negotiation. "There will be many high-ranking officers. You should take this opportunity." Lee Urim immediately refused. She didn't want to be involved with people like them. She didn't need this kind of opportunity. She won, but No's reaction changed instantly. He was no longer friendly. His tone became threatening. "Do you think you have the right to refuse?" His voice turned cold. "I am your superior. Do you know what will happen if you defy me? Your future in the military could end immediately." There was no hidden meaning in his words. It was a direct threat, a disguised order. She understood she had no other choice. Urim reluctantly agreed. But deep inside, she felt uneasy. Something was not right. Throughout the party, Lee Urim refused to drink a single drop of alcohol. She didn't want to let her guard down, especially in the presence of those she did not trust. Suddenly, Warrant Officer No announced that he had to leave early. A perfect chance for Urim to leave as well, without drawing attention. She stood up, ready to leave. But at that moment, Sergeant Jang, drunk, stood in her way. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath reeking of alcohol. "I drank too much and can't drive home. Can you take me back? His voice was slurred. Urim hesitated. She didn't want anything to do with him, but she also didn't want to make a scene. He was clearly drunk. If he drove himself, an accident could happen. Wanting to leave the party as soon as possible and avoid drawing attention, Urim reluctantly agreed. But she had no idea this would be the decision that led to her tragedy. While driving Jang home, when they reached a deserted road, he suddenly seized control and forced her to stop the car. Before she could react, he forced himself on her, ignoring her protests. Lee Urim fought back with all the strength she had, but she couldn't escape her cruel fate. She returned to the base in turmoil. It felt like a nightmare, but it was real. She had been violated by her own comrade. But she couldn't stay silent. She couldn't let him get away with it. She decided he had to pay. The next morning, she went straight to her direct superior, Warrant Officer No. She reported everything, demanding justice. She believed he would help her. No pretended to listen. He feigned sympathy. I understand, Lee Urim. I will report this to the higher-ups. Don't worry, Jang will be severely punished. Urim felt comforted. She believed her superior's promise, convinced that justice would be served. But it was all a trap. As soon as she left the office, No immediately called Jang to inform him. He couldn't let this incident come to light. If his superiors found out, he would be implicated as well. That evening, Sergeant Jang unexpectedly appeared in front of Lee Urim. His face filled with arrogance. He threatened her for what she had done and warned that if she didn't comply, he would reveal what happened in the car that night to her fiancé. Lee Urim couldn't take it anymore. She went back to No and demanded an explanation. But this time, No longer pretended to be sympathetic. His face was cold, filled with contempt. He didn't need to fake it anymore. This isn't anything new, he smirked. Did you really think you could serve in the military without facing things like this? Lee Urim froze. Those words hit her like a slap. She had believed someone would help her. But it was all a lie. No never intended to protect her. He only wanted to cover things up to protect himself. But Urim refused to let this go. She couldn't let Jang and No get away with it. She decided she would fight to the very end. She retrieved the dashcam footage from her car. The images captured on it were undeniable proof of what Jang had done to her. She took the evidence to the military police department. This time, she believed the truth would come to light. Jang would be punished, justice would be served. But she was wrong. The military police accepted her complaint, but took no action against Jang. No arrest warrant, no suspension from duty, nothing. Instead, they summoned her for questioning, again and again. Every interrogation forced her to relive the nightmare. She was forced to recount every horrifying detail, every moment she wished she could erase. This ordeal took a toll on her mental and physical health, causing her to deteriorate significantly. She demanded that the military police summon Jang. But it took half a month before they finally called him in. And it was just a perfunctory questioning. They asked him a few basic questions, showed no seriousness, and then let him go. No charges were filed. No disciplinary action was taken. Finally, after weeks of waiting, the investigation results were announced. And it broke her completely. Sergeant Jang denied everything. He gave a single excuse. I was drunk. I don't remember anything. And shockingly, the military police accepted this defense. There is not enough evidence to conclude that Jang committed any wrongdoing. That was their final ruling. Jang faced no punishment. He was merely transferred to another unit, a meaningless slap on the wrist that had zero impact on his life. The South Korean Air Force didn't want this case to tarnish its reputation, so they made a firm decision to bury everything. When all her cries for help led nowhere, when every door was slammed shut in her face, Lee Urim began losing faith in the military. She couldn't endure it any longer. She requested a 2-month medical leave to return home and rest. But she never expected that this decision would only make Jang bolder. He kept calling her, harassing her nonstop. Meanwhile, the military police department also sent people to pressure her into dropping the complaint, or more accurately, to threaten her. Pretend like nothing happened. You still have a future ahead of you. Don't ruin yourself. She refused. But then they escalated their threats. They would tell her family everything. This felt like a punch to her soul. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for her loved ones. She didn't want them to suffer alongside her. And so, she was forced to endure this alone. On May 18th, when her medical leave ended, Lee Urim returned to the base. However, she was informed that she had been transferred to the 15th Fighter Wing. The decision was made without any explanation. No one asked for her opinion, and no one warned her in advance. Lee Ran accepted the change in work environment, hoping that the new place could bring her some peace. But things didn't go as she expected. News of her assault had spread throughout the Air Force. Every time she walked past her colleagues, she could feel their judgmental stares, hear their whispers, and the cruel words filled with contempt. When everything exceeded her limit of endurance, Lee Ran could no longer hold on. She chose to end it all, but she did not leave in silence. She left behind clear evidence of the crimes committed against her. A video, a suicide note, a detailed file documenting everything that had happened to her. It was all carefully prepared. When news of Iran's death spread, the South Korean military immediately tried to suppress information. The Ministry of National Defense dismissed her death as a small, isolated incident. A brief statement was posted on the official website of the South Korean Air Force. No apology. No real investigation took place. Her family, however, could not accept this injustice. Her father refused to let his daughter be forgotten. In the depths of his grief, he submitted a petition to the Blue House demanding justice for his daughter. This petition was not just a plea for help. It was an indictment. He accused those involved in his daughter's death and demanded that the truth be brought to light before the public. Immediately, the case sent shockwaves throughout South Korea. No one could believe that such brutality existed within a prestigious military unit like the South Korean Air Force. Within 2 days, nearly 400,000 people signed the petition, demanding action against those responsible. Under immense public pressure, the South Korean Ministry of National Defense had no choice but to act. Within 2 days, Sergeant Jang was urgently arrested. He had nowhere left to run. During the investigation, Jang not only confessed to all accusations, but also revealed that he had assaulted another female soldier before. The pressure continued to mount. Mass protests erupted across the country, demanding severe punishment. The media continuously exposed loopholes in the military system. In the end, Sergeant Jang was sentenced to 9 years in prison, a harsher sentence than previous cases, but still not enough to appease public outrage. But there was still one major issue: those who covered up the case. The powerful figures who ignored the crime, who silenced Yairam, and they faced no punishment. Yairam's father understood this. He decided to take things further. He hired a lawyer to sue those involved for deliberately concealing the truth. They could not escape. They had to be held accountable. During the investigation, the lawyer uncovered a horrifying truth. Lee Yairam was not only attacked by Jang. Several other senior officers were also involved. The pressure on the South Korean military leadership became unbearable. Someone had to take responsibility. The Chief of Staff of the South Korean Air Force, General Lee Yong, was forced to resign. He had known everything but did nothing. The Minister of National Defense was also forced to issue a public apology and take accountability before the public. For the first time in history, a sexual assault case in the military forced high-ranking officials to face responsibility. The case was so serious that even former South Korean President Moon Jae-in had to publicly address it. In his speech, he emphasized the importance of ensuring safety and protecting the rights of those serving in the military. Lee Yairam sacrificed her life to expose this brutal reality. She did not die in vain. But did this truly expose all the dark corners of the military, or was it merely a small glimpse into an even greater mystery? Case 4. On October 25, 1994, Susan Smith stood in front of cameras pleading for the safe return of her 2 young sons. "I can't express how much they are wanting back home, how much we love them, we miss them." Next to her, David Smith, the boy's father, remained supportive. He looked shaken but composed. "I would like to take the time to plead to the American public that you please do not give up on these 2 little boys in the search for their return safe home to us. I ask that you continue to look for this car, these 2, our children, and for the suspect himself. That you continue to keep your eyes open, and anything that you see that might want to help to please call, and let it be known. I ask that you continue to pray for me and my wife, and for our family. But most of all that you continue to pray, the American public, continue to pray for Michael and Alex, that they are returned home safely to their mother and father, and the family members who love them so much, that you pray most of all for them, and that they are being taken care of, and that they are safe, and that they will return home safely." Susan told police she had been stopped at a red light at an intersection in Union, South Carolina, when a black man with a gun forced his way into her red Mazda. She claimed the man ordered her to drive for some time before making her stop on a rural road. Then she said he forced her out of the vehicle and drove off, taking her 2 sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, still strapped in their car seats with him. I was stopped at a red light, and just out of nowhere this black guy came up and just opened the door and jumped in the car. And he had a gun and he had it pointed at my side and told me to drive, and so I did. And when I tried to ask him why he was doing this or whatever, he just told me shut up or kill me. So I just kept driving. My babies were in the back seat and they were crying. And I tried to tell him everything was going to be okay. He told me to get out. And I said, well, can I get my children? And he said, no. He said, I don't have time for that. And they were just crying. Panicked and disoriented, Susan ran toward a nearby home, frantically pounding on the door for help. A resident answered and quickly called 911. Police arrived within minutes and immediately launched a search. For the next 9 days, the entire nation was gripped by the heartbreaking ordeal of a young mother pleading for her children's safe return. 2 young children being abducted by a stranger had people on high alert. Roadblocks were set up and Amber Alerts were issued, while flyers of Michael and Alex's faces were posted in stores and gas stations. Investigators reviewed security footage, checked traffic cameras, and questioned witnesses. But no one had seen any carjacking that night. Authorities expanded their search across Union County and beyond. Countless officers, volunteers, and search dogs combed through rural roads and wooded areas. Lakes and rivers were checked, but nothing turned up. Helicopters scoured highways for any trace of the Mazda protege. Investigators also searched crime reports of similar incidents, but no cases matched Susan's story. The case quickly gained national attention. News networks broadcast Susan's pleas and families across the country followed every update. If you had a TV on during that time, it was nearly impossible to avoid the coverage. Susan's face became a national image of a grieving mother appearing on every major news station. News crews flooded Union, capturing every development. Local residents helped organize community searches, and businesses donated food and supplies for search crews. Residents even left their porch lights on in solidarity, hoping the boys would be brought home safely. The FBI joined the investigation, and tips poured in as Susan's public pleas continued. But behind the scenes, investigators were starting to have doubts. Over the next few days, they kept pushing her, digging deeper with every conversation. They noticed that Susan's demeanor fluctuated. At press conferences, she appeared distraught and emotional. But other times she seemed calm and detached, especially in private conversations with officers. One detective noted how Susan seemed almost giddy about one of her sit-down television interviews. Before it began, she turned to David wide-eyed and credulous, as if excited about being on TV. Then as soon as the cameras started rolling, she shifted into a grieving mother persona. She was reveling in the spotlight. Meanwhile, 24-year-old David sat beside her, shell-shocked, his expression never changing. Officers also noted that Susan wasn't asking any questions about the search for her sons. Parents of missing children usually wanted constant updates. What was being done? Had police checked new areas? Did they have any leads? But Susan was uncharacteristically passive, waiting for detectives to approach her rather than demanding answers. And when she was alone, her behavior was even stranger. She was seen laughing and chatting casually when she thought no one was watching. Investigators noted her mood shifts, how she could go from sobbing in front of cameras to being composed in private. And speaking of sobbing, that term is being generous. Because officers weren't the only ones who noticed that her tearful pleas never seemed to produce any actual tears. And then there were the details of her story that didn't quite add up. She claimed the carjacker forced her to drive around for nearly an hour before making her pull over. But when police retraced her route, they found no witnesses, no security footage, and no evidence to support her timeline. And then there was the red light. Susan initially told police she had been stopped at a red light on Monarch Mills Road when the man approached her car. But late at night, the traffic lights were timed so a red light would only be triggered by cross traffic and would not stay red for as long as she reported. And no one reported seeing a stranded woman or a struggle at the intersection. There was also a lack of physical evidence. There were no tire marks where Susan claimed she had been forced out of the vehicle and the assailant sped off. No one had seen Susan's Mazda, no sightings, nothing. By the third day of searching, investigators stopped focusing on finding the carjacker and started focusing on Susan. At first, investigators kept their suspicions quiet, still treating the case publicly as an active search. But behind the scenes, they were now gathering evidence against Susan. They started by re-interviewing her, asking her to go over her story again, slowly and in detail. Each time she retold it, the timeline shifted slightly. She could not remember exactly how long the carjacker had forced her to drive. She wasn't sure which direction she had been facing at the red light. She said she struggled when the man pushed her out of the car, yet there were no injuries or signs of a struggle on her or at the scene where she claimed the incident occurred. The more she talked, the more her story unraveled. So they had her undergo a polygraph test, 2 of them. She failed both of them, and while not admissible in court, they revealed to police that Susan had something to hide. As the days passed, those polygraph failures, along with the inconsistencies in her statements, would get leaked to the public. Fully convinced that Susan was being truthful about the encounter, David tried his best to appease her, telling her she was just failing the polygraphs because she was distraught from all that she had been through. He coached her on how to relax during the tests. But he also noticed how she was more worried about whether people thought she was lying than she was about their boys. But law enforcement saw things differently. With each passing day, detectives grew even more certain that Susan was lying. So they called her in for another interrogation. It had been 9 days since their boys had gone missing. And before her interview with police, she and David sat down that morning for what would end up being their final TV interview. Then it was time for her police interview. Sheriff Howard Wells, who also happened to be Susan's godfather, directly confronted Susan about her story, telling her that he knew she was lying about the carjacking. He pointed out that she could not have been stopped at the red light on Monarch Mills Road if there were no other cars around. He reminded her that she had already revised her statement to account for that inconsistency, but even her backup story didn't hold up. Then Wells revealed something Susan had not expected. He told her that undercover officers had been stationed at that intersection that night for a drug investigation, and that they did not see any carjacker. Her back was against the wall. Wells told Susan that he would have to go public with the truth. Her false accusation had caused tension within Union's black community, and he couldn't allow the lie to stand. At that moment, Susan asked him to pray with her. As their prayer ended, Wells looked at her and said, "Susan, it is time." She dropped her head and began to sob, repeating how ashamed she was. Then, in a moment of desperation, she asked Sheriff Wells for his gun to use on herself. When he asked why, she said, she then described the crushing isolation that she had felt driving along Highway 49 that night. She had planned to take her sons to her mother's house, but her emotional state was so overwhelming that she believed not even her mother could help her. She spoke about her lifelong feelings of loneliness, failure, and despair, and about her abortion and her troubled marriage to David. Susan agreed to give a written confession. She began carefully filling 2 pages. She wrote in rounded script, drawing little hearts when she wrote the word heart. In her confession, she explained that she had originally planned to drive into the lake alone, but then she said she believed her children would be better off with God than they would be left behind without a mother. She wrote, she said she was ready to go down that ramp into the water, and I did go part way. But I stopped. I went again, and stopped. She said she tried 3 times to let the car roll into the water, shifting it into neutral. But each time she pulled the parking brake before it could move forward. Then, standing outside the car and overcome with grief and desperation, she reached in one last time and let go. She wrote, I was an absolute mental case. I couldn't believe what I had done. I never meant to hurt them. My children Michael and Alex are with our Heavenly Father now, and I know that they will never be hurt again. As a mom, that means more than words could ever say. The car with Michael and Alex strapped inside rolled forward, disappearing into the dark waters of the lake. And Susan walked away. The truth about her son's disappearance was no longer a mystery. But the darker truth behind what led to it all was yet to unfold. The uncomfortable details began spilling out when detectives asked Susan why she did it. She admitted that it revolved around the contents of a letter. But to understand the letter and why it mattered so much, we first have to look back at the slow-motion disaster that had been Susan Smith's life up until that point. Susan Lee Vaughn was born on September 26, 1971 in Union, South Carolina. When she was 6 years old, her father Harry Vaughn died by suicide. Her mother Linda Vaughn later married Beverly Russell, a local businessman and active member of the Christian Coalition. As a teenager, Susan reported that Beverly had sexually abused her, which he later admitted to. After high school, Susan took a job at Conso Products, a textile company in Union. It was there that she met David Smith, and the two began dating. Their relationship moved quickly, and in March 1991, when Susan was 19 years old, they got married. The marriage was unstable from the beginning. Both Susan and David were involved in extramarital affairs, and their relationship was marked by frequent arguments and separations. Despite the turmoil, they had 2 children together, Michael in 1991 and Alex in 1993. Financial struggles added to the couple's marital problems. They lived in a modest home in Union, and while both worked, money was tight. Susan had expensive tastes and reportedly resented their financial situation. Susan and David separated multiple times, and in May 1994, they officially divorced. So despite appearing as a couple in front of the cameras, David and Susan had actually been legally divorced for months. And while they remained connected through their sons, Susan had started moving on with her personal life. Not long after the divorce, she became involved with someone new. This new relationship quickly became the center of Susan's attention, and as she would reveal to investigators, a key part of what led to her boys being at the bottom of a lake. His name was Tom Finley. He was the son of her boss, a conso. By all accounts, he was nothing like David. He came from a well-known local family, and had the kind of wealth and status that Susan had always seemed to crave. But by her own admission, Susan was also sleeping with her boss, Tom's father. Which brings us back to her confession and that letter. Tom was justifiably not pleased that Susan was sleeping with his father. That admission, which Susan later recanted, was just one of several reasons he decided to end things with her. He outlined them all in a letter to her, stating in part, "We come from 2 different backgrounds." He encouraged Susan to avoid getting involved with married men. He also said his final statement to her was, in her confession letter, Susan openly admitted that Tom's rejection was at the heart of her despair and her deadly decision. She wrote, with her confession now on record, investigators formally placed Susan under arrest for 2 counts of murder. Before making any announcements or notifying family, authorities worked to confirm Susan's statements. They sent in divers to locate the submerged vehicle and the boys' bodies in John D. Long Lake. Using sonar equipment, they located a vehicle submerged about 122 feet from the shore, resting in 18 feet of water. As the car was pulled out, it became immediately clear that the 2 boys were still inside, strapped into their car seats, just as Susan had described. Authorities at the scene visibly reacted, some turning away, others appearing emotional as the reality set in. Emergency personnel confirmed the deaths of Michael and Alex Smith. Once the vehicle was fully removed, forensic teams began their examination. The car doors were locked, reinforcing Susan's admission that she had intentionally left her sons trapped inside as the car sank. With the vehicle and bodies recovered, the case against Susan Smith was now fully confirmed with physical evidence. The sheriff announced Susan's arrest, but by then her confession had already been leaked to the media. So David and Susan's family found out that Susan had killed her own sons the way the rest of the world did, on television. Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael, 3, and Alexander, 14 months. Overnight, Susan Smith became the most reviled woman in the country. Susan Smith is being arraigned in Union, South Carolina this morning, and confessed to killing her 2 young sons. The crime horrified the nation. And I would like to wear this white rose this morning for those 2 sweet children. People who had prayed for Michael and Alex's safe return were now horrified. The town of Union, which had rallied behind her, felt betrayed. People who had supported her during the search turned against her. Some of her own family members even distanced themselves from her. The media frenzy exploded with headlines calling her a monster and the most hated mother in America. When Susan was taken into custody, an angry crowd was there to greet her. But the outrage wasn't just about what she had done. It was also about who she had blamed. For 9 days, Susan had let the country believe that a black man had kidnapped her children at gunpoint, stoking racial fears and leading to unwarranted suspicion cast on innocent people. Her lie hit especially hard in Union, a town with a long and complicated history of racial tension and division. But Susan's mother, Linda Russell, felt differently. She was furious at how the media portrayed her daughter, stating, with Susan's statements on record and the physical evidence recovered, the full picture of her cold and calculated actions became clear. In the days leading up to the tragic night, people around 22-year-old Susan noticed something was off. Friends said she seemed troubled, but never explained why. Co-workers said she spoke constantly about Tom Finley. On the afternoon of October 25th, after arguing with Tom and realizing their relationship was over, Susan left work early. Instead of heading home, she picked her boys up from daycare, spent the next several hours driving aimlessly around Union. By 9 p.m., she arrived at the quiet rural lake outside of town. A passing driver later reported seeing Susan alone in the front of her car, which directly contradicted being forced to drive around with her carjacker. Susan sat with her sons for several minutes. Sensing something unusual, Michael asked. Susan released her car into the lake where it drifted away before sinking. Once she sent her sons to their deaths, Susan did not call for help. She did not run into the water. She simply turned and walked away. She climbed the boat ramp, made her way over to Highway 49, then ran about 100 yards to the nearest home with its porch lights on. She banged on the door and told the homeowners her fabricated story. In a quiet moment during her final interrogation, an agent asked Susan, she replied. She wished that she had never told Tom Finley about her affair with his father. Susan Smith's trial began on July 10, 1995, while the O.J. Simpson trial was still dominating national headlines. With the public already captivated by that high-profile case, Susan's trial became another media spectacle. News outlets rented out dozens of storefronts for the length of the trial. Scaffolding was built to support camera crews, and the entire street leading up to the courthouse was lined with media trucks. A local skating rink was turned into a temporary hotel for reporters. Journalists even hid in trees and behind bushes, trying to capture any glimpse of those involved. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that Susan's actions were premeditated. Their case focused on Susan's obsession with Tom Finley and her desire to remove her children to win him back. Forensic experts testified that the boys were alive when the car entered the water. Tests were conducted to determine how long it would take for the car to float, and then sink to show the jury the experience from the boys' perspective. As the prosecution played the video of the car sinking reenactment, attempting to get it admitted into evidence, Susan and a paralegal were observed giggling and playing. The video was successfully admitted, and when it was later played for the jury, Susan, still sitting in the same position in the courtroom, was instead crying. The obvious difference between her private reaction and her public performance reinforced what law enforcement already suspected: that Susan's displays of emotions both before and after the crime were an act. The defense did not deny that Susan killed her children. Instead, they argued that she was mentally unstable. A psychiatrist testified that Susan suffered from chronic depression and adjustment disorders. He stated that to satisfy a need to feel wanted, that Susan was, at the time, having sexual relationships with her boss at Conso, his son Tom Finley, her stepfather Beverly Russell, and her ex-husband David Smith. Beverly Russell took the stand and admitted his abuse of Susan growing up and well beyond. After her arrest, he wrote her a letter expressing his guilt and suggesting that his actions contributed to what happened. He wrote, "The prosecution argued that Beverly Russell's testimony was an attempt to shift some of the blame away from Susan. Another detail entered into evidence was that Susan had placed her wedding dress and wedding album in the trunk of the car before it sank, possibly a symbolic act of burying her past along with her sons, but also a potential indication of her premeditation." The defense asked the jury to consider life in prison instead of the death penalty, claiming that Susan acted out of desperation, not cruelty. On July 22, 1995, after just 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Susan guilty on both counts of murder, but instead of sentencing her to death, the jury recommended life in prison. This decision was largely influenced by testimony about Susan's mental health struggles and childhood trauma. However, at the time of her sentencing, a life sentence did not necessarily mean life behind bars. Under the law at the time, a life sentence meant that the defendant would be eligible for parole after 30 years, but jurors were not allowed to be informed of this fact. In fact, when the jury asked whether Susan would be eligible for parole, the judge instructed them to take a life sentence at its plain and usual meaning. The following year, laws changed to allow jurors to be informed about a defendant's parole eligibility. In the years following the loss of his sons, David Smith struggled to rebuild his life. He wrote a book sharing his story and pain called Beyond All Reason: My Life with Susan Smith. Some people saw the book as a way for him to process his grief. Others questioned his decision to profit from the tragedy. David remarried and divorced twice before marrying his current wife, Tiffany Smith. They have built a new life together, mostly staying out of the public eye. Susan's pattern of using people and relationships to get what she wanted continued once she was behind bars, involving both prison staff and fellow inmates. In 2000, it was discovered that she had sex with a prison guard who later served 3 months in jail for the relationship. Not long after, Susan became involved with Captain Alfred Rowe Jr., the head of security at the prison. According to Rowe, Susan would flirt with him, chat regularly, and like other inmates, even expose herself by dropping her towel as she passed him after showering. She also ratted out other inmates to gain his trust and get closer to him. Eventually, Susan offered him oral sex, which he accepted. Afterward, Rowe realized that he had just broken the law and risked up to 10 years in prison. Soon after, rumors started circulating, and Rowe suspected that Susan had turned him in. What he thought was a one-time, no-strings encounter became a full-blown scandal. Rowe was arrested, lost his job, and was sentenced to 5 years probation and 400 hours of community service. He was also added to the National Sex Offender Registry, where his name will remain for the rest of his life. His marriage survived, but he has been unable to find steady work since. He believes that Susan reported him to manufacture a scandal that would get her transferred to Leith Correctional Institution, a prison closer to her mother. In the end, Susan was indeed transferred, and Rowe lost everything, and Susan's relationships were not limited to staff. According to a former cellmate, Susan has also been in an ongoing romantic and sexual relationship with another female inmate who is black. An irony not lost on people familiar with Susan's original false claims about a black man carjacking her. When Susan was in an argument with one of her lovers, her cellmate overheard Susan tell the woman, "I killed my ing kids. Do you think I care about yours?" That former cellmate, named Christy, used to serve as Susan's guppy, acting as a lookout during Susan's sexual encounters, helping her obtain drugs and covering for her. At one point, Susan apologized to Christy for a close call that Christy had while covering for her. To reassure her, Susan promised to give her $300 the next day as a thank you, a huge amount to be exchanging behind bars, but a trivial amount for Susan, which leads to Susan's financial situation. According to Christy, money talks, and Susan Smith had a lot of it. So combining her money with being a long-serving inmate, Susan has a lot of power behind bars. Christy commented that if she were released, Susan could live the rest of her life with the money she's got. As for where she got so much money, Susan has received a steady stream of financial support from people on the outside, including through sites like writeaprisoner.com, where she received so many messages and negative media attention that the site eventually removed her profile. But Susan still receives a seemingly endless flow of money, from strangers to men she met online, and even a documentary filmmaker who deposited money into her prison account in exchange for information, a violation that led to disciplinary action in 2024. At one point, a man who had fallen for Susan said he planned to give her over $200,000 upon her release. One former admirer corresponded with her for 18 months. He noted how she never asked him for anything directly, but happily accepted whatever he sent. He loved her, but after finding out she was communicating with other men, he determined she probably didn't love him. He ended their relationship and said he felt duped. After serving 30 years in prison, Susan became eligible for parole in November 2024. From prosecutors to David Smith to the correctional officer whose life she ruined to her fellow inmates, no one believed that she had been rehabilitated or deserved release. At her hearing, she cried and expressed remorse. Ms. Smith, what would you like to tell us today? First of all, I want to say how very sorry I am. It's okay, Susan. Just talk with us. I know that what I did was so horrible. And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alex with all my heart. Did you use drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children? No, ma'am, I was not. Your attorney talked about working with mental health. Is that helpful to you? Ma'am? Mr. Thomas. I hear you. Mr. Thomas talked about the fact that you were working with mental health. And my question is that helpful to you? Yes, ma'am. Is that something that you would be willing to continue with on the outside if you were granted parole? Yes, ma'am. Susan's traumatic display of emotion does not at all match the straightforward, neutral line of questioning. Her exaggerated reaction just doesn't fit the moment. Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today? That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really am. I'm so sorry to the survivors that had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I really do. I was really I didn't lie to get away with it. I really didn't. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his son again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know those just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do. Many noticed that Susan's emotional display felt familiar, that despite the constant tissue dabbing and sniffles, it was nearly identical to the tearless pleas she had made to the nation 30 years earlier. What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned while you have been incarcerated? That people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important, and that decisions we make don't just affect us. They affect the people that we love, and not to take things or people for granted. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us today that wasn't in your packet or that has not already been said? I would just like to say that I am a Christian, and God is a big part of my life, and I know He has forgiven me. And it is by His grace and mercy and I have a lot of faith, and I live by that every day. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well. I guess, yeah, that's it. Thank you. David Smith attended the hearing and reminded the parole board that this was not a tragic accident, but a deliberate act. The parole board unanimously agreed. Susan's parole was denied with her history of manipulative behavior and prison infractions weighing heavily in their decision. It was reported that Susan was devastated by the result. She remains incarcerated at Leith Correctional Institution. Her next parole hearing is scheduled for November 2026. Few believe that much will change by then. In the end, one thing has stayed the same. Susan Smith has always looked out for Susan Smith. From the lies she fed the public to her manipulation behind bars, every move she has made has been self-serving. Case 5. In the summer of 1996, Belgium was shaken by the news of two 8-year-old girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, who were kidnapped, abused, and tortured for 3 months in a basement under a house in Marseille. Shortly after, police discovered 4 more bodies at different locations. 2 were hidden in the garden of a house in Sars-le-Bessier, while the other 2 were found in the basement of a house in Jamy. Some victims died from starvation or were buried alive while still showing signs of life. According to the investigation, these houses were owned by the couple Marc Dutroux and Michelle Martin. Between 1996 and 1997, with the help of his wife, Michelle Martin, Marc Dutroux kidnapped, abused, and murdered 5 girls, becoming the monster that terrorized Belgium. The public repeatedly asked, what drove the killer to commit such cruel acts? Like and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the full truth. Marc Dutroux, full name Marc-Paul Alain Dutroux, was born on November 6, 1956, in Aix-les-Bains, a district of Brussels, Belgium. He was the eldest child in a middle-class family with 5 siblings, growing up in an unstable environment. His father, Victor Dutroux, was a strict teacher who kept an emotional distance from his family and believed that harsh discipline was the only way to raise children. His mother, Janine Loans, was a gentle and patient woman, fully devoted to taking care of her family, but too weak to stand up to her domineering husband. Part of Marc Dutroux's childhood was spent in Burundi, then still part of Belgian Congo, where his father worked as a teacher. From a young age, Marc Dutroux displayed rebellious and uncontrollable behavior, frequently violating school and family rules. He attended 4 different elementary schools and changed schools 3 times in 5 years of secondary education before dropping out entirely. Throughout his school years, Dutroux remained isolated, had no friends, and performed poorly academically, causing his father to feel ashamed and furious. Instead of encouraging him, Victor Dutroux frequently insulted his son, calling him useless, a failure, and comparing him to other children. The violence was not only verbal, his father often physically assaulted him, forcing him to miss school for long periods. Witnessing these brutal beatings, Janine Loans remained silent, too afraid to intervene, knowing that if she spoke up, she would also become a victim. Years of enduring abuse fueled deep resentment within Marc Dutroux. He grew up with a hatred for his father's cruelty, but at the same time, he despised his mother for her weakness. Deep inside, he gradually developed the belief that the strong have the right to dominate the weak, a mindset that later influenced his horrifying crimes. When Marc Dutroux was 9 years old, Burundi gained independence, forcing his family to return to Belgium and settle in the village of Oba, Hainaut province. When Dutroux turned 16, his parents divorced, marking a major turning point in his life. He not only lost a complete family, but also felt completely abandoned. After the divorce, he continued living with his mother, but their relationship became more distant than ever. When she started a new relationship, Duttrix felt excluded, and as if he no longer had a place in the family. When she started a new relationship, Duttrix felt excluded, and as if he no longer had a place in the family. Meanwhile, his father, Victor Duttrix, left the family for a younger woman in Luxembourg, completely cutting off contact with his son, leaving him with deep resentment. Not wanting to continue living with his mother and her boyfriend, Duttrix moved in with an acquaintance. However, this was not a better choice. Instead, it pushed him further down a dark path. The acquaintance Duttrix turned to was not an ordinary person, but a convicted child abuser. This person helped Duttrix rent a room on the first floor of a fast food restaurant in Charleroi, a place known as a gathering spot for the local gay community. During the day, Duttrix worked as an electrician in a factory, but at night, he sank deeper into a depraved lifestyle, willing to do anything for money and to satisfy his thirst for power. He sold sexual services to the very acquaintance who had helped him rent the room, as well as to other gay clients. It was not about the money. Instead, Duttrix began to enjoy manipulating and controlling others. Despite trying various jobs, he was consistently impatient, easily bored, and never took his work seriously. He always believed that honest work was not meant for him. After working in a factory for a while with meager wages, Duttrix realized he did not want to be an ordinary laborer. He needed a faster, less restrictive path, one that would give him power. With this in mind, he entered the world of crime, experimenting with various illegal ways to make money, such as drug trafficking, theft, and selling stolen vehicles. His illegal activities quickly allowed him to amass considerable wealth. Not only did he buy luxury cars and live extravagantly, but Duttrix also invested in real estate, owning up to 7 valuable properties, creating the image of a successful man. However, behind this glamorous facade, Duttrix remained a resentful, hateful man, always seeking to impose his power on those weaker than him. In 1975, when Marc Duttrix was 21 years old, he met his first wife, Françoise Dubois, at an ice skating rink in La Louvière. At that time, Dubois was only 16, young, carefree, and unaware that she had fallen into the sights of a dangerous man. Attracted by Duttrix's appearance and experience, Dubois quickly entered a captivating relationship, believing she had found a strong man who could protect and take care of her. In 1976, just 1 year after meeting, Dubois agreed to marry Duttrix. They moved to Haines-Saint-Pierre, where they had 2 sons, but the dream of a happy family quickly crumbled. The marriage soon fell apart. Dubois realized that her husband was no longer as gentle as before. Duttrix gradually became controlling, extremely jealous, frequently irritable, and prone to outbursts of anger for no reason. He began spending less time with his family, frequently absent from home, spending his nights at ice rinks and nightclubs, where he devoted most of his time to approaching younger girls. In 1981, Marc Duttrix met Michelle Martin, a young woman with a gentle appearance. In 1982, Duttrix decided to confess this relationship to his wife, Françoise Dubois, with a strange proposal. He wanted all 3 of them to live together. As a familiar, Dubois firmly refused, unable to accept such an arrangement. The already fragile marriage became irreparable, leading to an official divorce in 1983. Immediately after the divorce, Duttrix moved in with Michelle Martin and Gautreau, starting a new life. Not long after they moved in together, Michelle Martin became pregnant with their first child, the first of 3 they would have together. However, their family happiness was merely a facade. Even while Martin was pregnant, Duttrix continued searching for other women, pursuing extramarital affairs despite Martin's presence. According to statements from Michelle Martin's friends and family, Duttrix not only controlled her strictly, but also frequently threatened and used violence to assert his power over her. Manipulated by Duttrix, Martin gradually lost her independence and became entangled in his dark world. He did not just turn her into a submissive woman, but also dragged her into a life of crime. Duttrix quickly trained Michelle Martin to be his accomplice, making her believe he was the only one who could protect and guide her life. In 1983, Duttrix began making money through thefts, involving Martin in these crimes. The 2 wandered around, targeting abandoned construction sites, stealing scrap metal and other materials to resell for profit. During one of these thefts, Duttrix accidentally reunited with Patrice Charbonnier, an old acquaintance. After a conversation, the 2 realized they could collaborate on bigger crimes. Charbonnier, as a postal worker, had access to addresses and daily routines of many elderly people living alone. This made it easier for Dutrix to plan attacks on the most vulnerable targets. That same year, Dutrix and Charbonnier carried out a daring robbery, targeting an elderly woman in Haines St. Pierre. Although the crime was not immediately discovered, by 1985, Charbonnier was arrested. During interrogation, he confessed to all the crimes he had committed with Dutrix. The police had enough evidence to arrest Dutrix and detain him for a month. However, he was released before a formal sentence was issued. After being released, Dutrix not only continued his theft activities, but also escalated his crimes by targeting young women, using violence and coercion to satisfy his desire for control. From January to December 1985, Marc Dutrix carried out a series of planned kidnappings and assaults, targeting at least 5 victims. Each attack was meticulously planned, selecting the right time and place to strike without being detected. The first victim Dutrix targeted was Catherine B., 18 years old. Late one night, Catherine B. left a class reunion party and headed to the bus stop to catch the last bus home. From a distance, Dutrix carefully observed, waiting for the right moment. He slowly drove closer, acting polite and friendly, offering Catherine B. a ride home, assuring her it was safe. Without suspicion, Catherine B. believed she had encountered a kind person and got into the car without hesitation. After about 15 minutes of driving, Catherine B. started to feel something was wrong. The road ahead was increasingly deserted, with no houses or streetlights, and Dutrix had fallen into an unsettling silence. He no longer appeared friendly as before. Instead, his gaze became cold and calculating. When the car stopped on a remote road, Catherine B. could feel the imminent danger. Dutrix got out of the driver's seat, approached her with a threatening stance, and forced himself on her, leaving her completely shocked and terrified. Out of fear, Catherine B. didn't dare to scream for help, only trying to stay calm, hoping the ordeal would end soon. After assaulting Catherine B., Dutrix let her go but threatened that if she told anyone, he would come back to punish her. Catherine B. feared retaliation, so she decided to remain silent and let the incident pass without reporting it to the police. The next victim was Sylvie D., who was believed to be the youngest victim targeted by Dutrix in 1985. On June 7, 1985, Sylvie D. was kidnapped on her way home from school. Dutrix approached her in his familiar car, telling her that her parents had asked him to take her home. Sylvie D. let her guard down and agreed to get in the car. After taking Sylvie to a secret location, Dutrix held her captive for a short period. She was completely terrified and did not understand what was happening. John Van Petegem, a new accomplice of Dutrix, was believed to have assisted him in this case, helping him capture Sylvie and take her to the holding site. Later, on October 17, 1985, Dutrix along with Michelle Martin and John Van Petegem continued their crimes by kidnapping Maria 5, 19 years old, using a similar approach to lure and capture her. 2 months later, on December 14, 1985, the group kidnapped Axel D., 18 years old, again using their well-practiced tactics. Just 4 days later, on December 18, 1985, Dutrix committed another attack, this time targeting Elizabeth G. After assaulting his victims, most were released, a tactic Dutrix used to avoid immediate detection as he believed they would be too scared to report him. However, one of the 5 victims decided to come forward, providing detailed information and descriptions of the perpetrator and his accomplices. In 1986, after an extended investigation, Marc Dutrix, Michelle Martin, and John Van Petegem were arrested and detained at Jamil Prison, awaiting trial. 3 years later, in 1989, the trial of Marc Dutrix, Michelle Martin, and John Van Petegem officially began, attracting significant public and media attention. Marc Dutrix was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Michelle Martin received a 5-year sentence. Additionally, Dutrix was given another 3-year sentence for a 1983 robbery and an extra 6 months for minor thefts. John Van Petegem was also punished with a 6.5-year prison sentence. After the sentencing in 1989, Dutrix was transferred to Bergen Prison to begin his sentence. John Van Petegem was released in 1991, but soon died in a traffic accident. Despite being sentenced to a total of 13 years, Dutrix served less than 3 years due to good behavior. By 1992, he was granted early release, sparking public outrage. After being freed, there was no mechanism to monitor Dutrix's behavior, allowing him to return to a life of crime without any obstacles. From previous kidnappings and assaults, Dutrix realized a major risk, releasing victims after the attack. He understood that if they reported him to the police, his chances of getting caught would be high. The idea of building a secret underground bunker to imprison victims for extended periods began to take shape. Mark Dutrix purchased several cheap properties in Charleroi, Belgium, but focused particularly on a house in Marsenal, which later became the base for his crimes. At this location, he secretly modified the house's structure. Using his mechanical knowledge, Dutrix personally designed and built a small prison cell with a concealed entrance and a basic ventilation system. He dug deep into the basement, expanding a small space of just about 2 meters by 1 meters, barely enough to hold 2 people. The bunker was incredibly cramped, with no windows, only a small ventilation hole to allow air circulation, causing those imprisoned to deteriorate rapidly both physically and mentally. The interior was damp, dark, and had poor sanitation. He placed only a small mattress and a few minimal items inside. He paid special attention to soundproofing, designing the entrance with thick concrete reinforcement to prevent any noise from escaping. Dutrix installed a trapdoor system carefully concealed under a wooden plank, making the bunker completely invisible to anyone visiting the house. After completing the secret bunker, Dutrix began executing his criminal plan. Dutrix realized that he couldn't carry out everything alone, so he turned to Bernard Weinstein, a former accomplice with experience in smuggling and theft. He convinced Weinstein that they could make millions by kidnapping young girls and selling them abroad. Dutrix painted a promising picture, making Weinstein hesitant at first, but eventually persuading him with the promise of enormous profits. Once they reached an agreement, the two began listing potential victims. Initially, Michelle Martin was unaware of Dutrix's plan. However, over time, he manipulated her mind, instilling twisted thoughts and distorting her moral compass. Dutrix convinced Martin that the kidnappings were not crimes, but a way to care for the children, making them part of a greater plan. Although she did not directly participate in the abductions, once she knew the truth, Martin chose to remain silent instead of stopping Dutrix. Dutrix often pretended to be a good man, appearing near schools to approach children. He carefully observed their habits and planned every detail before making a move. He selected victims based on their vulnerability, focusing on girls who frequently walked alone without strict parental supervision. Dutrix meticulously prepared everything needed for swift action, including a soundproof van, duct tape, ropes, and sedatives to ensure the victims couldn't resist or call for help. He conducted trials, appearing in parks or public places, pretending to ask for directions or offering rides to observe children's reactions, refining his approach for future attempts. Dutrix practiced using sedatives, experimenting with speed and dosage to ensure victims would lose consciousness quickly before they could cry for help. After weeks of meticulous surveillance, he identified Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo as his first victims, as the two girls often played near their homes without adult supervision. Julie and Melissa, both 8 years old, often played near their homes in Gras Helene. On the afternoon of June 24, 1995, Mark Dutrix and Bernard Weinstein drove a white van to the Gras Helene area. He pretended to ask for directions, using a friendly tone to create a sense of safety, trying to approach Julie and Melissa as naturally as possible. When Julie and Melissa began to show suspicion, Dutrix signaled Weinstein to act. Within seconds, they quickly covered the girls' mouths and dragged them into the van, shutting the door and driving away before anyone noticed. Returning to his home in Marsenal, Dutrix did not immediately take the victims to the basement, but kept the girls in his son's bedroom to avoid suspicion from neighbors. He and Weinstein began threatening and coercing the victims. Under Dutrix's tight control, the girls quickly lost their ability to resist and fell into a state of extreme fear. In the first few days, Dutrix pretended to be kind, bringing food to the girls. However, this act was not out of kindness, but rather to observe their reactions before escalating his violence. Less than a week later, when Dutrix saw that Julie and Melissa had completely lost hope, he decided to transfer them to the secret bunker in the basement. There, Dutrix began committing his most horrific acts, while recording everything on video. Nearly 2 months later, on August 22, 1995, Mark Dutrix and Michelle Liliev carried out another crime. Ben Marshall, 17, and Ifeel Ambrex, 19, were on their way home after attending a performance in West Enda. As they had no means of transportation, they decided to hitchhike to Ostenda. Mark Dutrix and Michelle Liliev happened to be driving by and noticed that the two girls were completely off guard. They stopped the car, acted friendly, and offered help. However, as soon as Anne and Ifeel Ambrex got in, the doors were locked. On the way back to Marcinelle, Dutrix gave them water mixed with sedatives, causing both to quickly lose consciousness. Unlike Julie and Melissa, Anne and Ifeel Ambrex were not immediately taken to the bunker, as Julie and Melissa were still imprisoned there. Dutrix kept the two girls in his son's bedroom, just as he had done with Julie and Melissa before. However, Ifeel Ambrex proved to be stronger and more resilient, constantly trying to resist and escape. She even came close to escaping twice, but was caught by Dutrix. Dutrix soon realized his critical mistake. Keeping 4 victims at once was impossible to control. Fearing that one of them would escape and expose everything, Dutrix made a ruthless decision. He had to kill Anne and Ifeel Ambrex to eliminate any risks. In September 1995, after days of deliberation, Dutrix decided to proceed with the murders of Anne and Ifeel Ambrex. According to Michelle Martin's later testimony, Dutrix drugged the victims and, together with Bernard Weinstein, took them to an isolated area near Weinstein's home. While Anne and Ifeel Ambrex were still drowsy from the drugs, Dutrix and Weinstein dug a deep hole and buried the two girls alive under the cold ground. After disposing of the bodies, Dutrix returned to his normal life. Michelle Martin, despite knowing everything, chose to remain silent. At this time, the police still suspected nothing, and Dutrix believed he was safe, able to continue his crimes without being discovered. In October 1995, Bernard Weinstein and another accomplice, Pierre Rochaud, stole a truck to sell it for profit. However, things quickly went wrong when Weinstein and Dutrix realized that the stolen truck was actually one from Dutrix's own warehouse. Dutrix immediately flew into a rage, believing Weinstein had betrayed him. He feared that Weinstein might reveal everything if caught, so he decided to act first to silence him. Just one day after the truck theft, Dutrix drugged Weinstein and then took him to the backyard of the house in Sars-la-Bussière, where he had previously disposed of his victims. In the cold night, Dutrix dug a deep hole and buried Weinstein alive, just as he had done with Anne and Eve. In December 1995, Dutrix was temporarily detained for his involvement in the truck theft. He was imprisoned for 3.5 months, during which time Michelle Martin was tasked with caring for Julie and Melissa. However, Michelle Martin did not do so. Instead of providing food and water, she left the two girls in the dark basement, causing Julie and Melissa to quickly weaken. When Dutrix returned in March 1996, he found the two girls completely exhausted. Not long after, Julie died, followed by Melissa. Once again, Dutrix took the victims' bodies to the backyard in Sars-la-Bussière, where he had previously buried other victims. Julie and Melissa were laid to rest right next to Bernard Weinstein. Afterward, he continued searching for new victims. At the end of May 1996, in the city of Cannes, a small town near Tournai, his eyes settled on Sabine Dardenne, a 12-year-old girl with blonde hair, small stature, and an innocent look. He watched her for days, memorizing her school schedule, the route she frequently took, and the times she was alone. Seeing a perfect opportunity, Dutrix decided to act on May 28, 1996. On the morning of May 28, 1996, Sabine Dardenne rode her bicycle to school as usual, unaware that a white van was quietly following behind her. When she reached a deserted road, Mark Dutrix stopped his vehicle, opened the door, and waved for Sabine to come over. He pretended to be a family acquaintance, saying that her parents had sent him to pick her up, claiming that there was an emergency and he needed to take her to a safe place. When Sabine hesitated, he stepped out of the car, showing concern, and gently reassured her that there was nothing to be afraid of. Dutrix used his words to manipulate the victim's mind, gradually lowering Sabine's guard. Despite still having some doubts, under Dutrix's continuous persuasion, Sabine eventually believed his words, leaving her bicycle by the roadside and stepping into the kidnapper's vehicle. Upon returning to his house in Marcinelle, Dutrix executed his plan systematically. He led Sabine down to the basement, opening the heavy steel door leading to the cramped, dark room he had prepared in advance. He manipulated Sabine's young mind, telling her that her parents no longer wanted her, that they had handed her over to him for care. These words cut into Sabine's mind like a knife, gradually making her lose hope of being rescued. Dutrix forced Sabine to call him master, and threatened that if she did not obey, she would be punished. He made Sabine write letters home, but these letters were never sent. Instead, they became tools for Dutrix to control his victim. Every day, Dutrix forced Sabine to comply with his every request, from doing household chores to submitting to his desires. Every time the steel door slammed shut, darkness engulfed Sabine. She trembled, curled up in the corner of the room, crying silently in fear and despair. On the night of August 9, 1996, Mark Dutrix and Michel Lelive carried out another kidnapping. This time, the victim was Letitia Delhaze, a 14-year-old girl from Bertrix, Belgium. Dutrix used the same strategy, following Letitia as she left the swimming pool and walked home alone. He pretended to approach her, asking for directions to appear friendly, but as soon as he had an opportunity, he forced her into his vehicle and quickly drove away. However, this time, Dutrix made a serious mistake. A witness happened to see the entire event, especially his suspicious white van, and clearly remembered the license plate number. Unlike previous times, the witness immediately reported to the police, providing a detailed description of the vehicle, giving investigators the most crucial clue they had so far. As soon as the report was received, the police checked the license plate and discovered that it belonged to Dutrix, a man with a history of child abduction. Immediately, the police narrowed Dutrix's residence in Marcinelle, launching a strict surveillance operation. After days of monitoring Dutrix's movements, the police decided they could not wait any longer. They believed the victim was still alive, and time was critical. On August 15, 1996, the police officially launched a raid on Dutrix's house. The moment the door was broken open, a horrifying secret was revealed, marking one of the most shocking events in Belgium's criminal history. At first, the police did not find anything unusual, but just as they were about to leave, an officer heard a faint knocking sound from beneath the ground. After breaking through the wooden planks, the police found a heavy iron door locked from the outside. When they forced it open, a horrifying sight emerged. Sabine Dardenne was curled up in a corner of the room, and Letitia Delhaze was still wearing the swimsuit from the day she was kidnapped. Both girls' eyes were filled with fear and panic. Dutrix was officially arrested. Initially, he denied all charges, shamelessly claiming that he only kept the girls to protect them from a corrupt society. However, when confronted with irrefutable evidence from the basement, Dutrix was forced to confess his crimes. Michel Martin, upon being arrested, immediately confessed in hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. She admitted to starving Julie and Melissa, leading to the deaths of the two children. On August 17, 1996, police excavated the garden in Sars-le-Bessier and found the bodies of Julie Lejeune, Melissa Rousseau, and Bernard Weinstein. A week later, they discovered the remains of Anne Marchel and Effigie Lambrechts, buried deep beneath Weinstein's warehouse floor. After nearly 8 years of investigation, on March 1, 2004, at the Arlon Criminal Court in Belgium, Mark Dutrix was officially sentenced to 30 years in prison, but only served 16 years before being released in 2012, a decision that caused massive public outrage. Michel Lelive was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his key role as an accomplice in the kidnappings. The basement in Marcinelle was demolished, but it remains a lasting symbol of one of Europe's most horrifying criminal cases. The Dutrix case shook Belgium, leading to massive protests against the justice system. Citizens demanded major reforms to prevent serious mistakes like Dutrix's early release in 1992 from happening again. The victims' families expressed their grief, stating that while the criminal could still live freely, they would have to endure their trauma for a lifetime. Case 6. Magdalena Aguilar Romero, born in 1990 in Guerrero, Mexico, in a humble working-class family in Cristo, a neighborhood in Tosca. From a young age, Magdalena displayed intelligence and a strong ambition to rise above her circumstances. She refused to accept a life of poverty. After graduating high school, she was determined to pursue a degree in nutrition, hoping to help people struggling with maintaining a healthy diet. With relentless effort, she was accepted into university in Iguala, Guerrero. In college, Magdalena was well loved by her friends for her cheerful personality, boundless energy, and willingness to help others. In 2011, while still a student, Magdalena met Cesar Gomez Arciniega, a 35-year-old man, 14 years older than her. Cesar lived with his mother, Silvia Arciniega Valadares, and owned a small business in Platero Alley, Guadalupe neighborhood, near the Zocalo Central Square in Tosca. He ran a snack bar that specialized in serving drinks alongside free appetizers, a popular business model in Mexico. 6 months into their relationship, Magdalena became pregnant with their first child. This news prompted the couple to move in together. Not long after their first child was born, they got married and soon welcomed a second baby. This led Magdalena to pause her studies to focus on raising their children, but she never abandoned her dream of completing her degree in nutrition. Her father, Diego, was always fully supportive of her, encouraging her to pursue her dreams. His unwavering support further fueled Magdalena's determination to return to university in Iguala, Guerrero. But this decision triggered a change in Caesar. He was no longer the gentle man she once knew. His true nature gradually emerged, a controlling, pathologically jealous abuser. Magdalena's frequent absences angered him. He constantly blamed, criticized, and pressured her to give up her job, abandon her studies, and dedicate herself entirely to the family. But Magdalena refused to back down. She did not want to be a woman shackled by marriage like her mother had been. And this decision, unknowingly, ignited a tragedy that could not be undone. At the same time, Caesar's control over Magdalena grew more extreme. He forbade her from wearing makeup, dressing attractively, and even exercising. He wanted her to wither away, lose her confidence, and become lifeless. He believed that if Magdalena became weak, she would never leave him. Magdalena's health visibly deteriorated. She lost weight rapidly, her face became pale, and her once vibrant body grew frail, so much so that her mother, Maria, was alarmed. One day when Maria asked Magdalena about her children's diet, Magdalena casually replied, "They eat potatoes with sauce." Her family began to suspect something was terribly wrong. The signs were clear: she was isolated, controlled, and forced to live in fear. But every time they tried to help, Magdalena would force a weak smile and repeat the same old answer: "Everything is fine." Caesar didn't just control Magdalena, he imposed his rigid ideology on her entire family. One day, when she wanted to visit her brother Saul, Caesar coldly declared, "He's gay. I don't want my son growing up with that kind of influence." He forbade Magdalena from seeing Saul, despite the siblings having been very close. Magdalena was heartbroken, but she could not resist. She knew that any form of defiance would send Caesar into a rage. Caesar didn't just rob Magdalena of her freedom, he ensnared her in a financial trap. One day, the Tax and Public Credit Administration contacted Magdalena, demanding that she adjust the tax records for a jewelry store. Magdalena was shocked to discover that Caesar had secretly registered the store under her name. He had handed control of the business to his relatives without informing her. On paper, this meant Magdalena was fully responsible for the store's taxes and legal issues. Magdalena confronted Caesar, demanding an explanation. He merely smirked and told her she didn't need to worry about it. But she knew the truth: he had set a trap for her. If anything went wrong, she would be the one held legally accountable, not him. Their relationship deteriorated rapidly. Magdalena began to realize that she was living in a cage, a prison of control built by Caesar. One morning in August 2014, Magdalena called her father, her voice trembling but resolute. "I can't endure this anymore. I want to leave Caesar." Without hesitation, Diego Aguilar Zamora immediately promised to come get her. While Caesar was away, Magdalena hurriedly gathered her personal documents, clothes, and essential belongings. Then, she left with her 2 children. When Caesar realized what had happened, he continuously called and texted, begging her to return. When his pleas failed, he turned to threats, spreading false rumors about Magdalena and doing everything he could to force her back. But Magdalena was no longer afraid of him. She had endured too much. In 2015, she officially divorced Caesar. However, despite cutting marital ties, they still shared custody of their 2 children. And this became the fateful link that would later lead Magdalena to tragedy. Both agreed to co-parent, which meant Magdalena had to maintain contact with Caesar. Every time they met, he would make things difficult for her and act bitterly. 3 years after leaving Caesar, Magdalena's life took a turn for the better. She was no longer the submissive woman she used to be. She was strong, radiant, and most importantly, had regained control of her life. She returned to university, completed her studies, and began an internship at a medical center in Tosca. She spent time with her children, taking them out, exploring the world with them, making up for the years they had spent in the oppressive atmosphere of her toxic marriage. But Caesar had never forgotten Magdalena. He constantly harassed her whenever he had the chance. This forced Magdalena to seek help from the Camino Violeta Women's Support Center in Tosca. There, she received psychological counseling to help her overcome the emotional trauma caused by domestic violence. The center's experts assessed Magdalena's case as high risk, as breakups like hers, where the wife had to flee from her husband, often led the abuser to harbor deep resentment and a dangerous obsession. Camino Violeta transferred Magdalena's case to the public prosecutor's office and the Women's Support Division of the Tosca government for monitoring. But what did the authorities do? Nothing. They took no action to protect her. They dismissed it as just another divorce case, ignoring all the signs of a man who could become a murderer. Caesar also knew this, and it became the final trigger that made him decide to end everything. January 13th, 2018, that morning, Magdalena planned to pick up her children as per the custody agreement. The two children had been with Caesar since January 11th. She told her mother that after picking up the kids, they would meet at 5:30 p.m. at the church in Tosca for a prayer service for their late great-grandfather. At 8:30 a.m., Magdalena left home, saying that before picking up her children, she would stop by the medical center to see a patient. Everything seemed normal. Magdalena finished her work at the medical center and then headed to the agreed location to pick up her children on time. But Caesar never showed up. The children were not there. Magdalena called him multiple times, but there was no response. A deep unease began to rise within her. Though hesitant, she knew she had no choice but to go directly to Caesar's house to find her children. The moment Magdalena stepped into Caesar's house was the moment the door to her fate shut behind her. She disappeared. No one ever saw Magdalena walk out of that house again. Meanwhile, at the church in Tosca, Maria de Los Angeles continued to wait for her daughter to arrive. When the service ended and Magdalena was still not there, her mother grew anxious. She repeatedly called and texted, but there was no response. Her anxiety quickly turned into fear. Maria hurried back home, hoping Magdalena had returned earlier, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. Although her instincts told her that something was wrong, Maria still clung to the hope that her daughter would return soon. The next morning, Magdalena was still unreachable. Maria's worry reached its peak. She decided to go to Caesar's house to find her daughter. There, Caesar told Maria that Magdalena had come to his house, but left around 10 p.m. to meet a friend. He also emphasized she didn't take the kids with her. His story was full of inconsistencies. There was no way Magdalena would abandon her children, nor would she leave without informing her family. Maria stared at Caesar. Then her eyes landed on something disturbing. There were clear scratch marks on his face. A chilling sensation ran down her spine. A mother's intuition told her that something terrible had happened. She could not hesitate any longer. Maria immediately went to the local police station to report her daughter missing. But the police did nothing. They refused to investigate or search for Magdalena. They categorized the case as a voluntary disappearance, even though the family repeatedly insisted that this was not a simple case of a woman leaving home. The government's apathy forced Magdalena's family to start searching on their own. They posted her photos all over the streets of Tosca, spread the news on social media, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. But all they received was deafening silence. Time passed, and the investigation remained stagnant. Maria visited the Guerrero prosecutor's office multiple times, pleading for them to open an investigation. But every time she went, she was met with cold indifference from the authorities. 9 days passed in vain. No leads, no answers. Despair turned into rage. Magdalena's family decided to organize a protest to pressure the authorities into taking action. And faced with this pressure, the police had no reason to refuse a press. On the morning of January 22, 2018, police raided the business premises of Cesar Gomez Arciniega. After narrowing down the suspects, they decided to conduct a search. No one could have imagined the horrific scene they were about to witness. Inside an industrial oven, a large enamel pot rests on a metal rack. As the police lift the lid, a burst of hot steam rises, and inside lies a partially cooked human body. On the floor, they found a black plastic bag containing additional body parts, carefully wrapped. But it didn't stop there. When they checked the refrigerator, they discovered the remaining body parts preserved inside. Through DNA analysis, it was confirmed that all of the remains belonged to Magdalena, the woman who had been missing for days. The sheer brutality of the crime left the entire investigation team stunned. No one could believe that a man could commit such an inhumane act against the mother of his own children. The police immediately informed Magdalena's family. When Maria received the call, she knew the worst had happened. But nothing could have prepared her for the horrific truth. Magdalena's remains were transferred to the forensic center in Chilpancingo, the capital of Guerrero, for examination. The forensic report confirms Magdalena died of asphyxiation. After being murdered, her body was dismembered and a portion was cooked. In a press conference led by Xavier Olia Pelaez, the Attorney General of Guerrero, the gruesome details of the case were publicly revealed. Cesar Gomez Arciniega was identified as the prime suspect, but he had fled before the police arrived. Police also identified his mother, Sylvia Arciniega Valladares, as an accomplice. She was accused of helping Cesar dispose of Magdalena's body and was immediately taken into custody. News of the case sent shockwaves across Guerrero. The media covered it extensively and public outrage erupted over the sheer brutality of the crime. Magdalena's tragedy ignited a fierce movement against violence toward women and the negligence of Mexican authorities. On the morning of January 24, 2018, thousands of people gathered at the church in Tasco to bid farewell to Magdalena Aguilar Romero. The church was filled to capacity, and the sounds echoed in the air, blending with the cold silence of grief and injustice. Magdalena's coffin was covered with white flowers, a symbol of mourning but also of the quiet, smoldering anger within those who loved her. That afternoon after the funeral, thousands of mourners transformed the farewell ceremony into a massive protest in Tasco. They took to the streets carrying banners and signs that read, "We are all Magdalena. Not one more. We demand justice." Public outrage intensified at the brutality of the crime and the government's prior negligence. The pressure forced the authorities to launch a serious investigation. Subsequent investigations uncovered a horrifying truth. Magdalena's two young children, only 4 and 6 years old at the time, had witnessed their father and grandmother murdering their mother. This revelation sent shockwaves across Mexico, fueling an even larger wave of public fury. The people of Tasco continued to march, demanding severe punishment for the killers. As Cesar remained on the run, the Guerrero prosecutor's office officially announced a reward of 500,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $30,000 US, for any information leading to his capture. But all initial efforts failed. Cesar had likely prepared for this moment, making his capture far from immediate. During this time, Magdalena's family, women's rights organizations, and her friends tirelessly organized protests, putting constant pressure on the government to demand justice and transparency. They refused to let Magdalena be forgotten. Her story was repeatedly told in marches, featured in the media, and used as a rallying cry in nationwide campaigns against domestic violence. Cesar might have been hiding, but he could not escape the wrath of an entire nation. Every border, every entry point, every area where he might have connections was placed under strict surveillance. Yet, he remained a ghost. No one knew where he was. Many rumors began to spread. Some claimed he had fled to Guatemala, while others believed he was hiding in the mountains of Guerrero, a region controlled by drug cartels. While Cesar remained in hiding, on December 6, 2019, the trial of Sylvia Arciniega Valladares officially took place. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison for her direct role in the Magdalena case. Sylvia was not only sentenced to prison, but was also ordered to compensate Magdalena's family. However, the exact amount was not disclosed. Still, no amount of money could ever make up for the pain she had caused. While Sylvia served her sentence, Cesar continued to evade capture. He remained on the run for over 4 years, forcing authorities to issue an international arrest warrant through Interpol. It took 3 more years, but on July 19, 2022, the manhunt finally came to an end. Cesar Gomez Arciniega was arrested in Tijuana, a border city notorious for harboring fugitives. He was caught in an alley in the Juan Bosco area while drinking alcohol. When police moved in, he did not resist, but he attempted to conceal his identity, falsely claiming to be Massimo Herrera Garcia. But it was too late. After verifying his identity, the truth was exposed. He was indeed Cesar Gomez Arciniega, the murderer who had enraged an entire nation. The Baja California Attorney General's office quickly handed Cesar over to the Guerrero authorities. He was charged with femicide, the murder of a woman due to her gender, a particularly severe crime under Mexican law. He was held at the Guerrero Social Reintegration Center while awaiting trial. But even after his arrest, he still sought to delay justice. His trial dragged on as Cesar repeatedly requested to change lawyers. This was a common tactic among criminals, used to prolong the process and inflict further suffering on the victim's family. Each time the trial was postponed, Magdalena's family had to endure more anguish. Her two children, then only 12 and 10 years old, were repeatedly summoned to provide testimony. These children had witnessed an unimaginable horror. Now they were being forced to relive the trauma over and over again. Their testimonies played a crucial role in convicting Caesar, but being forced to recall the past deepened their psychological scars. Both children remain in therapy to overcome the severe trauma, but will they ever be able to forget? Will they ever live a normal life? No one can say for sure. In May 2023, Magdalena's brother uploaded a video to social media demanding justice. In the video, he expressed his outrage that his nephews continued to suffer due to the unnecessary delays in the trial. He emphasized, "Even though my nephew's testimonies helped convict Sylvia, my family still wants Caesar to receive the punishment he deserves. We cannot allow this trial to drag on indefinitely." The video quickly went viral, garnering massive support from the online community. Thousands of people shared it, putting pressure on the authorities to speed up the trial process. Finally, after more than a year of delays, in November 2023, Cesar Gomez Arciniega was sentenced to 55 years in prison for the murder of Magdalena Aguilar Romero. The murderer finally faced justice, but no prison sentence could ever bring Magdalena back or erase the years of suffering her family had endured. This was not just a crime, it was a harrowing wake-up call about domestic violence, government indifference, and the horrific consequences of justice delayed. Magdalena Aguilar Romero did not live to see the day Caesar was convicted, but her story continues to echo a stark reminder of domestic violence and the failure of the justice system. Case 7. The central figures in today's story are best friends Tiffany Hall and Jamela Tunstall. They grew up in the same neighborhood in East St. Louis, Illinois. Tiffany had a strong-willed personality. She frequently clashed with her family and often had heated arguments with her mother. Beverly Cross, Tiffany's mother, once revealed that her daughter was an uncontrollable rebel, even setting the kitchen on fire as a teenager. Despite this, Jamela trusted Tiffany completely. She didn't care about Tiffany's troubled past. In 1999, at age 16, Jamela Tunstall welcomed her first child, a baby boy named Demon. Later, she gave birth to 2 more children, even in 2003 and Jamela in 2004. Becoming a mother at such a young age was not easy. Jamela's life was a struggle filled with financial hardships, emotional turmoil, and immense responsibilities. She even lost custody of her children after being accused of disciplining her eldest son with a belt. But Jamela never gave up. She fought to regain custody, took parenting classes, endured social judgment, and ultimately won back her children. Meanwhile, Tiffany Hall also became a mother at 16. She soon had a second child, but her life took a dark turn in 1999 when she lost custody of her firstborn. When social workers intervened, they found the 2-month-old baby in a severely malnourished state. The child was limp like a rag doll, unresponsive to touch. The neglect was so severe that by age 5, the child was still wearing diapers and struggling with speech, only able to make incoherent sounds. In 2002, in a controversial decision, Tiffany regained custody of both daughters after Illinois prosecutors chose not to press charges against her. The Department of Children and Family Services deemed her no longer a threat to her children. This should have been a fresh start for Tiffany, an opportunity to become a better mother, but this fragile hope was quickly shattered by what happened next. At 23, Tiffany Hall spiraled further into crime. She was charged with possession of stolen credit cards, just one of many legal troubles she encountered over the years. Meanwhile, Jamela Tunstall's life took a completely different path. As Tiffany's world descended into chaos, Jamela focused on building a peaceful life for herself and her children. By 2006, Jamela was pregnant with her 4th child, eagerly anticipating the birth of a baby girl. She was filled with hope for a better future for her family. Despite their differences, the friendship between Tiffany and Jamela remained strong. Tiffany often helped Jamela take care of her children, as if she still held on to their past bond. But no one knew that a horrifying plan had already been set in motion, and a night of terror was fast approaching. On September 15, 2006, Tiffany called the police in a frantic voice. She claimed that she had suffered a miscarriage at Frank Holton Park and that the baby was stillborn. When paramedics arrived, Tiffany was clutching a lifeless newborn. She appeared utterly devastated, sobbing in despair. She was taken to the hospital along with the baby. But within minutes, doctors began to notice something wasn't right. When doctors suggested a medical examination, Tiffany immediately refused. She insisted she didn't need to be checked and just wanted to go home. This raised even more suspicion something was definitely wrong. As soon as Tiffany left the hospital, investigators began their inquiry. During questioning, her statements were riddled with inconsistencies. Initially, she claimed she had been attacked and assaulted, but just minutes later, she completely retracted her statement. The contradictions in her testimony only deepened investigators' suspicions. Furthermore, no one, except her boyfriend, a Navy officer, knew that Tiffany had been pregnant. Neither her family nor her friends were aware of any pregnancy. When the baby girl underwent an autopsy, doctors found no signs of trauma. The cause of death remained a mystery. Tiffany left the hospital, abandoning the baby, whom she had named Taylor H., in the morgue. But soon after, she organized a bizarre funeral for the infant. On September 21, 2006, the funeral for the baby girl was held. Just before the ceremony, Tiffany suddenly requested a postponement, claiming she needed to wait for more family members to attend. But in reality, only 2 family members showed up. She arrived 2 hours late, something completely unusual. At a funeral, people typically arrive early to pay their respects, but Tiffany didn't seem to care at all. Among the few attendees was Tiffany's boyfriend, KH, who had taken leave from his Navy duties to attend the funeral. He believed the baby being buried was his daughter. While all eyes were on the strange funeral, a new fear silently spread. No one knew where Jamela Tunstall was. She had been missing for days. No calls, no messages, no trace. Jamela's family and friends grew increasingly frantic. They kept calling, texting, and searching for her on social media. But every effort failed. Jamela had vanished into thin air, as if she had never existed. After the funeral, Tiffany had a private conversation with her boyfriend, KH. In a chilling and disturbing moment, she accidentally revealed a horrifying truth. She casually admitted, "I took the baby out of my best friend's stomach." Those words hit KH like a ton of bricks. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. How could Tiffany say something so monstrous? Everything around him seemed to spin. The puzzle pieces started falling into place, revealing a nightmare beyond imagination. KH knew he couldn't stay silent. He had to act before things spiraled further out of control. Even worse, Jamela Tunstall, Tiffany's best friend, had been missing for days. Without hesitation, KH grabbed his phone and called the police. As soon as the report was made, police immediately formed a missing person search team. 6 agonizing days passed, with Jamela's family and friends barely eating or sleeping, desperately hoping for a miracle. Then the truth finally surfaced. A patrol team discovered Jamela Tunstall's body in an overgrown field, just a few blocks from Tiffany's house. Jamela lay there, lifeless, her body horribly mutilated, her abdomen showing signs of severe trauma. Near her remains, police found a blood-stained pair of scissors, the very tool Tiffany used to cut the baby from Jamela's womb. News of the horrific crime spread like wildfire, becoming a sensational headline across major newspapers. A pregnant mother brutally murdered in an act of unimaginable cruelty. That very night, Tiffany was arrested. But instead of showing fear or remorse, she remained eerily calm, as if what had just happened was nothing out of the ordinary. In the interrogation room, Tiffany began revealing chilling details of her crime. She calmly recounted, on the morning of September 16, 2006, Jamela had visited Tiffany's mother's house in Belleville to hang out. A heated argument broke out between them. In a fit of rage, Tiffany attacked Jamela, knocking her unconscious. Then, Tiffany bound Jamela's hands and feet with duct tape, preventing her from escaping. In a moment of sheer panic, Jamela regained consciousness and struggled desperately to break free. But Tiffany had already lost all sense of humanity. She covered Jamela's mouth with duct tape, silencing her cries for help, and dragged her into the bathroom. There, she cut the baby out of Jamela's womb, a scene too horrifying to imagine. Jamela was still alive, writhing in agony, but powerless to change her fate. Minutes later, she grew weaker and weaker, until she took her last breath. A lifelong friendship had just ended in the most brutal way possible. Immediately after committing the crime, Tiffany tried to cover her tracks. She wrapped Jamela's body in a shower curtain, then dragged it to a nearby overgrown field. But the most terrifying part? This wasn't an impulsive act. It was premeditated. A week before the murder, Tiffany had secretly bought the necessary tools. A homemade birthing kit, including scissors, rubbing alcohol, latex gloves, and a syringe. This proved that Tiffany had planned the crime long before carrying it out. This was not a heat-of-the-moment killing. It was a cold-blooded execution. Even more disturbing, for months leading up to the crime, Tiffany had pretended to be pregnant, fabricating an entire story to lure her Navy boyfriend Cage back home. She sewed maternity clothes, stuffed her belly to make it appear larger, and even bought baby supplies, diapers and bottles, to convince everyone she was expecting. When news of Jamella's murder and disbelief broke out, no one could comprehend how this horrifying chain of events unfolded. How could someone be this cruel? But the nightmare was far from over. As police dug deeper into the case, they uncovered an even more horrifying truth. Jamella's 3 children were also missing. No one knew where they were. No one had seen them since the day their mother disappeared. A new wave of terror spread through the community. Were they still alive? Or had Tiffany already taken their lives too? On September 22, 2006, police expanded their investigation. They searched Jamella's apartment, hoping to find clues about the missing children. Officers gathered photos of the children and shared them with the media, hoping someone would recognize them and help bring them home safely. During the investigation, even Collins, Jamella's partner, became a key person of interest. The police needed him to provide more details about Jamella's children and their last known whereabouts. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they confirmed that Tiffany's daughter was safe, but Jamella's 3 children were still missing. According to even Collins, the last time he saw the children was on September 18th, just 3 days prior. That night, Tiffany came to pick up the children, claiming that Jamella had asked her to babysit. Since the 2 women were best friends, even saw no reason to doubt her. The children couldn't have just disappeared without a trace. Police tightened the investigation, shifting their full attention onto Tiffany. Meanwhile, Tiffany remained in custody. Under the relentless pressure of police interrogations, she finally confessed to where the children were. Tiffany's admission led police back to Jamella's apartment the next morning. None of the officers could have imagined what they were about to witness. The moment they entered, a putrid stench filled the air, hitting them like a punch to the gut. Every officer held their breath in horror. They froze in place. Something was terribly wrong. And then, the gruesome truth finally revealed itself. In the cramped apartment, the naked bodies of Jamella's 3 children were found in the most unimaginable places. 2 of them were stuffed into the washing machine. The 3rd child lay motionless inside the dryer. Their small bodies had severely decomposed after days trapped in the sealed space, unnoticed by the outside world. The sight left the entire investigation team speechless. A young officer, unable to bear the horror, ran outside and vomited. The most chilling fact? Police had actually walked past this very apartment just 1 day earlier, unaware that the 3 children's bodies were still inside. When questioned about her motives, Tiffany calmly admitted to everything, but never gave a reason for killing the 3 innocent children. To understand what really happened, we need to go back to September 18, 2006, just 3 days before the funeral, right after Tiffany had already murdered Jamella and her unborn baby. That day, Tiffany continued executing her twisted plan. She lied to even Collins, heartlessly claiming that Jamella had asked her to take the children out for the day and borrow her car. When she brought the children back to the apartment, Tiffany acted as if nothing was wrong. She looked at them and said, "It's bath time." But instead of laughter and splashing water, the bathroom, where Tiffany had murdered Jamella, became the setting for an even more horrific crime. One by one, Tiffany drowned Jamella's 3 children in the bathtub. Demon, 7 years old, even 2 years old, Janella, 1 year old, none of them stood a chance. Some reports indicate that Tiffany drugged the children with cough syrup before killing them, possibly to make them drowsy and unable to resist. After murdering all 3 children, Tiffany calmly dragged their bodies out and disposed of them just as we've seen in the previous segment. After committing the horrific crimes, Tiffany simply walked away, continuing her life as if nothing had happened. This inhuman act not only ended the lives of 3 innocent children, but also wiped out Jamella's entire family within a single week. By this point, Tiffany had confessed to everything. She murdered her best friend, stole her unborn baby, and mercilessly killed her 3 children. Yet, Tiffany never provided any explanation as to why she had targeted the children. On September 29, 2006, the funeral of Jamella Tunstall and her 3 children took place, leaving the community in tears. More than 700 people attended to say their final goodbyes. Within just 3 days, over $30,000 was raised to help cover the funeral expenses. But while the community mourned, the legal battle surrounding Tiffany Hall grew increasingly complex. Initially, Tiffany was only charged with the murders of Jamela and her unborn child. However, as the investigation progressed, she was officially charged with the murders of the 3 children as well. At first, Tiffany pleaded not guilty, which led to a series of psychiatric evaluations before her trial. She was initially assigned a public defender, but when the state declared its intent to pursue the death penalty, a more experienced attorney was appointed to defend her. James Gray, Tiffany's lawyer, revealed that while she was deemed mentally competent to stand trial, she suffered from severe psychological issues with an IQ of just 70, borderline intellectual disability. What made this case even more controversial was the fact that Tiffany herself was a mother. At the time of the crimes, her 2 daughters were only 5 and 8 years old. Finally, on June 10, 2008, the trial concluded with a life sentence without parole for Tiffany Hall. The verdict reflected the unforgivable cruelty of her crimes, murdering 5 innocent lives, including Jamela and her 3 children. But even after the sentence was handed down, painful questions remained unanswered. What could drive a mother to commit such monstrous acts? In September 2008, Tiffany attempted to withdraw her guilty plea, claiming that her lawyer had failed to represent her properly. However, the court rejected her request. In 2012, she filed another appeal, requesting a new attorney, but once again, her request was denied. Tiffany refused to give up. She insisted that her lawyers had failed to thoroughly investigate her mental health condition at the time of her guilty plea. According to legal records, James Gray had not even received Tiffany's psychiatric evaluation report until 2 days after she had already pleaded guilty. This raised serious concerns over whether Tiffany had fully understood the nature of her crimes, or if she was merely a victim of untreated psychological disorders. A psychiatric report revealed that Tiffany had a long history of severe mental illnesses, including psychotic disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, and mild intellectual disability. These diagnoses sparked public debate. How should the legal system handle criminals suffering from severe mental illness? In response, the court decided to overturn the denial of post-conviction relief, meaning Tiffany could continue to appeal her case. Over the next few years, her case was repeatedly revised and reviewed, with new attorneys stepping in during 2015 and 2016. Tiffany continued requesting a new attorney, but her requests were rejected. Finally, in 2020, Tiffany won a crucial legal battle that allowed her to file another appeal for post-conviction relief. While her case remains entangled in the appeals process, at the very least, Jamela's family can find some solace in knowing that Tiffany is still behind bars. Currently, Tiffany Hall is serving her sentence at the Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. The case of Tiffany Hall will forever be remembered as one of the most horrifying crimes in history, not only for the monstrous brutality of the killer, but also for the many questions that may never be answered. Case 8. On April 17, 1933, in Hindenburg, Germany, Joachim George Kroll was born into a poor, working-class family, during a time when Germany was engulfed in war and instability. He was the 6th child in a family of 9 siblings, growing up in an environment of both emotional and material deprivation. His father, a steel mill worker, was rough and strict. He frequently treated his wife and children harshly, making the household atmosphere constantly tense. His mother, Maria Kroll, was a submissive woman who did not dare to resist her husband's dominance and violence. From a young age, Kroll showed signs of intellectual disability. He struggled with reading, could not grasp numbers properly, and was often mocked by his peers as a fool. In 1939, when World War II broke out, the Kroll family's life became even more difficult. Food supplies ran out, hunger spread, and looting became rampant. Kroll was often left hungry, his body frail and malnourished. In 1943, his father was drafted into the army. For his mother, it was a shock, but for Kroll, it was a relief, as he no longer had to endure his father's rage. In 1945, the war ended, and Germany was left in ruins. Cities were devastated, and the survivors struggled to exist among the wreckage. At this time, Kroll was 12 years old, but he had not developed like other children. He was withdrawn, quiet, had no friends, and increasingly retreated into his own world. No one paid attention to him. His mother was too busy making a living, while the neighbors only saw a quiet, different child. In this isolation, Kroll began to show strange interests. He spent hours observing animals, but not for fun. One winter afternoon, Kroll caught a stray cat, holding its neck tightly until it stopped struggling. He did not immediately dispose of the animal's body, but sat quietly, observing it for hours. Kroll did not feel fear or disgust. For the first time in his life, he had complete control over the life and death of a living being. This excitement became an obsession, driving him to kill more animals. He did not just kill them, but he relished every moment of their desperate struggle. At the age of 15, Kroll did not stop at killing animals. He began to dissect them. He cut their bodies into pieces, examined their internal organs, and memorized every detail. Watching them writhe in pain gave him a strange sense of excitement. At 16, Kroll gradually realized something different. He had no ordinary attraction to girls his age. What truly excited him was not beauty or seduction, but the moment they struggled before being set free. Every night, Kroll lay in bed, imagining the moment he would use his hands to grasp a girl's neck, watching his prey panic and despair before going still. But he had not yet dared to do it. He had not found the perfect opportunity, nor was he fully prepared to commit a crime. In 1950, when Kroll was 17, he dropped out of school completely. His intellectual disability made it impossible for him to continue his studies, forcing him to become a manual laborer. But Kroll's fate quickly changed when his mother died when he was 22. From then on, no one controlled him anymore. No one stopped his growing urge to kill. He began observing women and children more closely, tracking their every step on the streets. He learned how to evaluate his prey. Who was the easiest to approach? Who was the weakest? Who had the least chance of fighting back? If he wanted to act without suspicion, he needed to choose the right target. After months of careful watching, the perfect opportunity finally arrived. One afternoon in February 1955, in Lüdinghausen, West Germany, 19-year-old Irmgard Strell walked alone on a deserted path along the forest. From a distance, Joachim Kroll silently watched her. His heart pounded, and his palms were drenched in sweat. A mixture of excitement and nervousness filled him. Kroll approached, pretending to ask for directions as an excuse to get closer. Irmgard stopped and turned to look at him. In that very moment, he suddenly lunged at her, subduing her swiftly, leaving her no chance to react or scream. Irmgard struggled fiercely, trying to escape. Kroll could feel every desperate breath, every convulsion of her body as she grew weaker. Within minutes, her body went limp. He loosened his grip, looking down at his victim, as an eerie pleasure spread through him. He dragged Irmgard's body into the bushes and began his horrific assault. Kroll realized that killing someone brought him more pleasure than anything he had ever experienced. After satisfying himself, he left Irmgard's body in the forest and walked away from the crime scene. The next day, police found Irmgard Strell's body. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, and there were signs of assault on her body. The police launched an investigation into the case, and a local man named Heinrich Ott was arrested. Unfortunately, the real perpetrator of the crime was not Heinrich Ott. Not long after, Heinrich Ott was sentenced to life in prison. Overcome with despair, he took his own life in jail. In 1956, in Kirchhellen, Kroll searched for a new victim. His next target was Erika Schilletter, a 12-year-old girl playing alone in an abandoned field. Kroll gently approached her, acting friendly and luring Erika into the forest. The naive girl had no suspicion and trusted Kroll, following him. As soon as they were deep in the woods, Kroll suddenly attacked. He grabbed the girl's neck, feeling every struggle, every weak breath fading away. Within minutes, Erika collapsed, her body lying motionless under Kroll's grasp. He repeated the same twisted acts he had done with Irmgard. After satisfying himself, he abandoned the body in the forest, believing no one would ever find him. The police discovered Erika's body the next day, another murder with a similar method, proving that the real perpetrator might not have been Heinrich Ott. In 1967, Kroll moved to the town of Greifenhausen, a small and peaceful area. There, he was no longer a withdrawn man, but gradually integrated into the community. He befriended children in the neighborhood, appearing friendly and approachable. The kids called him Uncle Kroll, a kind man who always smiled. No one could have guessed that behind that smile was a true monster. On June 22, 1967, Kroll committed his next murder. This time, the victim was neither a child nor a young woman, but a 61-year-old elderly woman, Maria Hedgen. Kroll spotted Maria walking along the shore of Lake Baldny. He approached, pretending to start a conversation, but Maria did not want to talk to him and kept walking. This made Kroll angry, and he immediately swung his hand, striking her head hard, causing her to collapse. He dragged her into a nearby bush and strangled her until she was completely lifeless. Then, Kroll carried out his horrific act and left the body in the bushes. Later, the police found Maria's body, but once again they had no clues to lead them to Kroll. He continued to escape justice, continuing his hunt. From 1959 to 1970, Kroll continuously murdered 13 victims, primarily women and children. However, the real number was much higher. After committing the murders, he began dismembering the victims to dispose of them more easily. He divided the bodies into several parts and scattered them in forests, rivers, or flushed down drains. In some cases, Kroll began committing horrific acts with his victims. He took certain body parts home, cooked, and ate them. Later, Kroll admitted, just on a whim, I decided to cut up certain parts of the victim's body to see what they tasted like. After the 1970 case, Joachim Kroll disappeared for 6 years without committing any further crimes. After 6 years in hiding, Joachim Kroll committed another shocking crime. On July 3, 1976, Kroll committed his 14th and final murder. The victim was Marion Ketter, a 4-year-old girl. She disappeared while playing at a playground in the Lahr district of Duisburg. Notably, this area was very close to Kroll's apartment, just a short distance away. Instead of attacking on sight as he had before, he changed his strategy. He lured Marion in and secretly took her to his apartment. Inside the apartment, Kroll quickly committed his crime. He attacked the girl and then dismembered her body. He attempted to dispose of the remains by flushing the intestines down the shared toilet of the apartment complex. However, the old plumbing system could not handle such a large amount, leading to a severe blockage. That afternoon, a neighbor used the shared restroom and noticed something unusual. He noticed that the toilet wouldn't flush properly, showing signs of a severe blockage. When the neighbor asked Kroll about the issue, he gave a chilling response. The toilet is clogged because it's full of intestines. The neighbor was shocked, but did not realize the gravity of the situation. He simply thought Kroll was an eccentric man with a strange sense of humor. At the same time, some residents of the apartment complex saw Kroll throwing blood-stained clothes into the trash outside. They began to suspect something, but hesitated to get involved. The next day, police launched a large-scale search for Marion Ketter. They went door-to-door questioning residents, asking if anyone had seen the girl last. However, no one provided useful information. July 3, 1976, Duisburg, West Germany. That morning, a resident of the apartment complex called the management office to report wastewater overflowing from the drainage pipe. A maintenance worker was dispatched to inspect the issue. When he used a rod to probe the pipe, he felt a soft, unusual object stuck inside. He pulled hard, and immediately something horrifying came out. A piece of human flesh, pale, decomposing, emitting a foul stench. Terrified, he dropped his tool, stumbled backward, and quickly called the police. About 15 minutes later, the police arrived at the scene. They inspected the pipes and found more body parts stuck inside. Forensic experts quickly determined that the remains belonged to a young girl, around 4 to 5 years old. Police reviewed recent missing person reports. Immediately a name stood out, Marion Ketter, 4 years old. Her parents had reported her missing the previous day. The entire apartment complex was sealed off. Police began questioning each resident, but no one had seen or heard anything suspicious. However, a resident from apartment 10 provided a crucial clue. This person recounted a strange conversation with Kroll. Several others also reported seeing Kroll disposing of suspicious items in the trash. At the same time, the team investigating the drainage system discovered that the body parts had been flushed from an apartment on the 3rd floor. An officer proposed a theory. The perpetrator may have attempted to erase evidence by cutting the body into small pieces and flushing them down the drain. However, he likely did not anticipate that the plumbing system would clog. When they arrived at apartment 11 on the 3rd floor, the police knocked on the door. A middle-aged, gaunt man with an emotionless gaze answered. An officer asked, "Did you notice anything unusual?" The man gave a faint smile, his voice eerily calm. "No, I was just at home as usual." The police requested to inspect the apartment, and Kroll cheerfully agreed, leading them inside. As soon as they entered, the officers immediately sensed something was wrong. The air in the apartment was thick, filled with an indescribable stench. One officer noticed the gas stove. On it, a pot was still simmering, steam rising faintly. He stepped closer, slowly lifted the lid. Inside, a tiny hand floated on the surface. When they opened the freezer, the police were horrified to discover black bags filled with slimy red liquid. A deadly silence filled the room. An officer drew his gun and ordered, "Put your hands up immediately. Joachim Kroll, you are under arrest." And that was the moment when the cold-blooded killer was finally exposed to justice. The interrogation room was eerily silent. Joachim Kroll sat across from the police officer, his face expressionless. An officer leaned in and asked Kroll, "How did you kill Marion Ketter?" Kroll gave a faint smile and began recounting every detail. The police were shocked as Kroll calmly described the process of disposing of his victim, step by step, as if he were discussing a recipe. When asked about his motive, Kroll casually replied, "I like the feeling of control. I killed someone to satisfy myself and used them to save money on food." Kroll confessed to killing at least 14 people, but the actual number could be much higher. The police reviewed old case files and found many unsolved murders dating back to 1955. All these cases had one thing in common: the victims had been strangled. Kroll continued his confession, stating that he saw nothing wrong with what he had done. He did not consider his victims as people, but as mere objects for his satisfaction. The police realized they were dealing with a truly inhuman monster. He showed no remorse for his actions. The next question sent chills through the interrogation room. "Are there any more bodies hidden?" Kroll smirked and simply said, "Maybe," and he refused to say anything more. The investigation expanded. The police searched every apartment Kroll had lived in and reviewed missing persons reports. With each search, more horrifying truths were uncovered. In one of Kroll's former apartments, the police discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floor. When they opened it, they found dozens of human bones. A forensic psychologist remarked about Kroll, "He is unlike other serial killers. He did not kill out of rage or lust, he killed because he saw people as food." Perhaps the years of starvation during the war left a deep psychological scar on Kroll's mind. The trial of Joachim Kroll began in 1982 in Duisburg, Germany. Lasting 151 days, it became one of the longest and most complex trials in German judicial history. Kroll was charged with 8 murders and 1 attempted murder. In court, he remained calm and indifferent to the outrage from the victims' families. On April 8, 1982, Joachim Kroll was sentenced to life imprisonment for his crimes. He was imprisoned at Rheinbach prison near Bonn. On July 1, 1991, Kroll died of a heart attack while serving his sentence. When news of Joachim Kroll's death was announced, most people in Germany felt relieved. They saw it as the inevitable and fitting end for a brutal serial killer. The case's conclusion received widespread approval from the public. Many believed that his punishment was well-deserved. The victims' families expressed their sorrow, but felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had been served.